This is the Mayor's Climate Commission meeting. It's our second to last meeting. And today we will start with the roll call. Julia?
Thank you. So when you hear your name, for all the commissioners, if you could please unmute yourself and just make note of your presence, that would be great. So first we have Chair Ann Stossel.
Present.
Alberto Ayala.
Here.
Amanda Blackwood. April Wick.
Present.
Arlen Orchard. Not present. Chris Ledesma.
Here.
Dave Tanner. Not present. Henry Lee.
Here.
James Corliss.
Here.
Rory Littman.
Here.
Mackenzie Weezer.
Here.
Meg Arnold.
Here.
Naila Pope-Hardin.
Here.
Nikki Mohana.
Here.
Stephanie Bray.
Here.
Steve Hansen.
Here. Henry, say hi.
Hey.
Hi.
Oh,
And finally, we have Trish Rodriguez.
Present. Hi.
great. Thank you, Julia, and thanks everyone for being here. I do believe all the commissioners will be joining eventually. I know Commissioners Nelson and Teal are expected to arrive around 5 o'clock. And I don't think Amanda Blackwood's here yet, but I wanted to let everyone know that we do have a new commissioner replacing Kai Morton, who was formerly with us. Amanda Blackwood, who's the chair and president of the Sac Metro Chamber, and we're very grateful she could join the commission. So I think she'll be joining shortly. It's been a while since we last met, so it's good to see everybody, even though it's on a screen. The first thing we're going to do is have Julia Kim go over some logistics, both for the commissioners and the members of the public who have joined us.
Excellent.
Julia?
I just wanted to go over some logistics very briefly. So just a reminder for all of our panelists, for all of our commissioners and our speakers as well, if you could please keep yourselves on mute when you're not speaking, that would be great to just minimize some of the background noise. For all of our commissioners on the line, we're hoping that you can use the hand raising function during the Q&A and discussion portions of the agenda, and Chair Stossel will then call on each of the commissioners so that you can unmute yourself and jump into the discussion. And for all of our commissioners and panelists, if there are any technical issues that you're facing, please reach out to me using the chat function. For all of our participants and public members who are joining us today, great to have you on here. If you are facing technical issues, we hope that you can email me, Julia at jkim@lgc.org. Again, that's jkim@lgc.org. I'll be monitoring my inbox throughout the meeting so that I can help resolve any issues. And I'll pass it back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Julia. I just want to start by thanking the commissioners and all your organizations and the Local Government Commission for all your leadership over the last weeks and months, and for continuing to engage in the Climate Commission during this time with all the other demands and pressures that you have on you. Thanks to the Local Government Commission and to all of you, we're on track to finish our work and our report by the end of June. That being said, our recommendations will now be submitted in the context of a very different environment than when we set out in the context of the momentous health and economic challenges that we're facing and that were created by the pandemic. As our governments are working on economic and stimulus recovery packages, it's critical that the goal isn't just to go back to business as usual, but that we learn from what we're experiencing right now, and that our recovery efforts also lead to greater sustainability and resiliency. So there are measures we can take to address the public health crisis, the economic crisis, and the climate crisis at the same time. I want to acknowledge Kate for all the work she's done on that over the last few weeks. And I really hope that that's where we can focus most of our discussion today, although we do have several other agenda items to cover in order to timely finalize our report. I see that Amanda has joined, so welcome, Amanda. We're really grateful that you've been able to join the commission, so thanks for being here. I want to just give you a brief overview of the agenda and our objectives for this evening. We'll start with progress reports, brief progress reports from LGC and the 2 cities as usual. And then later on in the agenda, we'll also have an informational presentation from Erica Bjork from the Metro Chamber on business issues and concerns based on their review of the recommendations. We've got 2 action items to take up this evening. The first is on the equity recommendations that we've been talking about over the last few months. And these are the recommendations that would go to the cities to guide them in developing, implementing, and operationalizing their climate action plans. And our second action item will be the recommendations that we want to put forth to the cities on year 1 or near-term projects. And that's where we can really focus on opportunities to align climate action with the recovery efforts. And finally, we'll review the actual draft report, the culmination of all our work. We're not voting on that tonight. We won't be voting until our last meeting at the end of June. The purpose tonight is to get input on the report so that LGC can finalize it and we can hopefully adopt it at our final meeting. So that's the agenda for tonight. I wanted to touch on the public comment process just briefly. Public comment has been really important to our process throughout the 18 or so months we've been working together. And of course, it now has to be handled differently because we can't meet in person. So the LGC Mayor's Commission website has been open for comments relating to this agenda since April 22nd, and it'll continue to be open through our last meeting in June. All the comments that we received through 3 p.m. today are available on our homepage, the LGC Mayor's Commission homepage, that both the commissioners and the public have access to. And as we go through the agenda, as we get to each pertinent item, Kate will summarize the comments that we've received. In addition to that, the public is able to make comments in real time through the website, and the commissioners can review those in real time, as can the public. And as we go along, we'll point to you how to do that. It's a bit cumbersome, but we're trying to do our best to continue to get as much public input as possible and be transparent. So we received a lot of public comment, and I want to thank all the members of the public who took the time to submit their comments. Before we move on to the agenda, any questions, comments, or concerns from commissioners? Okay, I see no one has their hand up. So with that, I will turn it over to Kate for the progress report.
Sure. Did you want to turn it over to Julia to do any of the logistics? Or are we good on that? I'm happy to jump in.
I think we covered that. Is there more?
Okay.
I leave it to you if there's something else that we need to go over.
Okay, I'm happy to jump in. So a few things that have been keeping us busy since our last meeting. We've been able to hold our final TAC meetings related to finance and funding, and then also the equity TAC. So we will have the opportunity to talk about the equity TAC final recommendations. We'll have Jackie Cole who will present today, and we will be putting that up for a vote. I know we've talked about it over a number of meetings, so it'll be good to finally put that to a vote. We will have a presentation on the funding and financing options that have been laid out by KPMG and the group that weighed in at our next meeting. So you guys have had a chance to see that. That's in the supplemental report. I know that's something that has been important to all of us as we start to think about implementation. So we're excited to have that at our last meeting as we are moving into that implementation phase. And then on the TAC, I just want to, again, express a debt of gratitude to the numerous people who spent hours and hours of their time to weigh in and provide such great input, which you will see in the supplemental report. It's very robust, and we really thank everybody who was involved in that process. We also were able to hold business roundtables, so very pleased to have Erica Bjork here to present some of the feedback that they've collected through the chamber and through some of those roundtables. It's something that, as Ann said, we're in a very different context now, so I know that this commission and those of us who are staffing it are very mindful of the need to align our efforts, especially in this first phase, with economic recovery efforts, because that's going to be really critical with so many people suffering in our region. We also have the draft reports, which we'll be talking about, that will come up for discussion. The report, we posted the draft report for comment. You guys have all had a chance to see it as well. And then we also have the supplemental report, which is really the staff report, which provides the context and lays out a menu of options for the two cities to consider when they move towards implementation. Finally, the commission timeline. This is our second to last meeting. We're getting very close. Our final meeting, we're narrowing in on June 29th, and we'll be providing you some information on that soon. So in between this meeting and then anything that comes up through our discussions with all of you and from the public feedback that you will hear today, we will spend that time making any changes that you guys would like to see to the report. So that's it on updates. Happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, I will turn it back to you, Ann.
Great, thanks, Kate. Questions for Kate? Okay. Then the next order of business is to hear from the two cities, and we'll start from with the city of Sacramento. So I'll invite Remy Mendoza, Senior City Planner, to give his update.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Stossball and Commissioners. Remy Mendoza, Project Manager for the city's 2040 General Plan Update and Climate Action Plan. I'd like to take just a few moments of your time to provide a brief update on the status of the City of Sacramento's Climate Action Plan. Next. Our technical analysis for the Climate Action Plan has been underway. The City of Sacramento has completed a community-wide greenhouse gas emissions inventory. The 2016 inventory demonstrated that we achieved our 2020 target even with population growth. That target was 15% below 2005 levels by 2020. The greenhouse gas emission forecast shows us where we need to reduce our emissions and how to target our measures to meet our long-term goals. We have selected preliminary targets that are consistent with the findings of this commission to put Sacramento on a trajectory to meet the carbon neutrality goal by 2045. We're looking forward to the June commission meeting where we can share a draft list of measures that will help us strive to meet our goal of carbon neutrality. Next. This commission has gathered input from public members, key stakeholders through youth summits, online, and business roundtables. As part of the general plan update and the climate action plan, the city will continue to build on this critical outreach work of this commission. Next. Some of our efforts so far have included a couple of meetings with our environmental justice working group to review 22 core actions, 3 citywide workshops, 10 community plan meetings, 3 listening sessions, plus pop-up events, youth engagement at Luther Burbank High School and Dyer Kelly Elementary School, youth engagement through Summer at City Hall, and engagement with youth at various nonprofits and community-based organizations such as La Familia, Asian Resources, and Green Tech. A majority of the feedback that we've received from the Environmental Justice Working Group has been positive or neutral. Focus on equity will continue to be prioritized during the development and implementation phase of the Climate Action Plan. More detail on programs will result in better feedback from the community, and our Environmental Justice Group will have an opportunity to review not just the framework, but the draft Climate Action Plan as well, and provide us their feedback. Next. In terms of Climate Commission integration, city staff and the consultants have attended all of the technical advisory committee meetings. With regards to the greenhouse reduction measure process, we will integrate the Climate Commission's key reduction strategies. We'll develop implementable actions with levers for cities, SMUD, and other partners. Our strategies will have substantial evidence for CEQA, and we'll focus on greenhouse reducing strategies as well as adaptation and resiliency. And all of this will be refined through our continued community outreach. Next. Next week, we will be kicking off our second phase of outreach. The original plan was to meet in person, but due to the pandemic situation, we have shifted to virtual engagement. A link to our online platform will be available from our project website at sac2040gpu.org. From May 18th through June 5th, we'll be going live with a virtual workshop that can be accessed by the public 24 hours a day, 7 days a week via mobile phone or computer. Please help us complete the survey, share it with your networks, and have your constituents or employees complete the survey. Recognizing that not everyone has online access, we will also provide an option to participate over the phone with assistance from city staff. During this phase of outreach, we want to build consensus with the community to prioritize potential strategies for the general plan and the climate action plan that will guide Sacramento's growth towards a vision of a greener, more equitable, and a more livable city. In an effort to reach our hard-to-reach communities, we'll also be partnering with youth from Sac City Unified School District to encourage them to engage with other youth and help us provide interpretation for any family members who are not English speakers. We will also be reaching out to neighborhoods, community-based organizations, social service providers, faith-based organizations, and nonprofits to help us promote the virtual workshop. Next. In terms of the project timeline and the next steps, in the second phase of our project, we will follow up with our virtual engagement with a scientific survey. We'll be developing a financing plan as well as a short list of transformational actions. And then we'll be moving to the third phase in the fall, where we will prepare the draft climate action plan, and it will include complete environmental review as well. This concludes my presentation. Thank you for your time, and we're available to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Remy. Questions for Remy about the city of Sacramento? I don't see any. Commissioner Arlen Orchard has joined, so welcome, Arlen. Thanks for being here. James Corliss, Commissioner Corliss.
Thanks, Ann, and thanks, Remy. A couple of questions, and I know this may be hard in the spot to answer, but I think I asked this in one of the first commission meetings. Do you see anything as you look at the draft report from the Climate Commission, you think about the climate action plan, general plan updates? I think it's our hope, obviously, that the work that we've done at the commission will be sort of incorporated into the city's works and plans. Have you or anybody been able to sort of crosswalk that yet? And are there any, either red flags or green lights?
Yes, we have asked our consultant to, do that crosswalk, and they are, preparing to look at that very closely. And at the next June commission meeting, I'd be very happy to present our draft measures and have that in-depth discussion.
I appreciate that. And again, I think from just the prior commission discussions that we've had on this are very robust. Good conversation, right? It's the implementation of this. In many ways, it's going to be the hardest, very, very difficult. And we just want to make sure that, we can do whatever we can to help both cities figure out how to truly embed this into the work and the DNA of everything the two cities do.
Absolutely. And, we've been asked to come up with an ambitious plan, and that requires big, bold ideas, but they may also have big price tags associated with them. And so that's something that we'll be looking at as well as part of our climate action plan, is identifying the financing component of implementing some of these measures, such as the bicycle master plan, for example. So we will be providing that information in our climate action plan as well.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Commissioner Pope Harden, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you for that presentation, Remy. I might have missed it. Oh, I woke up the sleeping 1-year-old. Is there any extra effort towards making sure that like the outreach moving forward is more accessible or accessible to folks? Like what type of efforts are you guys making to make sure that you're getting good outreach?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. We're planning to go on the radio. That's one thing we're doing. We're doing translation so that the virtual workshops will be available in Spanish, English, Chinese. There'll be closed caption that's available, recognizing that there's a digital divide and some seniors or others may not have access to complete the survey online or on their mobile phone. And we're going to have staff available on a telephone who can help them complete the surveys as well. And then we're working closely with community-based organizations, nonprofits, faith-based organizations to help us get the word out to everybody to help us participate and provide their feedback on these key strategies for the general plan and the climate action plan. You're welcome.
Thanks. Yeah, we'll be talking about equity and outreach to our more vulnerable communities later on in the agenda. And I think following up to Commissioner Pope Harden's question, Remy, I just think it's really important that as soon as possible, we try to get you really up to speed on all those conversations so that you can take advantage. There's been a lot of very hard work and thought put into those. And
absolutely, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, we want to help you be successful on that. Commissioner Ayala.
Thanks, Ann, and thanks, Remy. Let me raise a question that James Court has kind of prompted in my mind, and that is, first of all, commending you and the city for making such good progress and for trying to integrate as much as you can into your climate action plan, what we've been doing here in the commission. But my question for you is more in terms of just the logistics of what happens next. So maybe for the benefit of the commissioners to make sure that we all understand where this goes. And sorry if I missed this, when are you anticipating that the city council will finally vote in approval? And how is the cap going to be used? Can you share a couple of anticipated examples where you think some of the commitments that you guys are putting into it will essentially be operationalized?
Sure, that's a really good question. There are two key milestones coming up where we anticipate bringing the climate action plan or the draft climate action plan to our city council and our elected officials. So later this summer, once we have completed our community outreach, we have the final report from this commission. We'll be bringing forward some key strategies and policies to the city council for their direction and a green light for us to continue to move forward as we prepare our draft climate action plan and our draft general plan. So we'll be looking for approval from our elected officials. Once we have the green light, at that point then we'll start to prepare the material, the draft documents and the environmental review, which will take about 6 to 8 months. And then we look to have the climate action plan finally adopted in the fall of 2021. Yeah, and to the extent that any of the key measures are incorporated, I anticipate a lot of these key measures are going to be incorporated into our climate action plan with respect to the different sectors, whether it's the built environment, and we're looking at maybe electrification, then anticipate that there could be ordinances that follow adoption of a climate action plan to actually implement it and bring those measures into fruition to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions.
Thanks. I know that Remy has and his team have a fairly detailed presentation planned for June, which I think we'll all really enjoy, around what measures they're looking at and how the commission work is being integrated. So we'll look forward to that, Remy. Any other questions? Commissioner Littman. Oh, Mackenzie's raising the real hand. We'll do Commissioner Littman and then Commissioner Weiser.
Yeah, I was wondering whether we can start to get those ordinances in place before 2021. It seems like those are the easy steps to set the groundwork to do the things that you are going to have in the climate action plan. But waiting until fall of 2021 seems really late to get started on those foundational things that need to be done.
Thank you, Commissioner Littman, for that question. I know that we will be having conversations with our elected officials earlier than when the climate action plan is adopted, and certainly if there's direction for staff to move forward ahead of that, that's a possibility.
Commissioner Weiser.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on the public outreach question. Can you give us some sort of sense in terms of, has the public participation been greater than you expected, less than anticipated, or, you know, what is the level of public involvement in your outreach thus far?
Sure. Pre the pandemic, the public participation, was really great. We had citywide workshops. We had, all the tables were full. We had over 100 participants. The same at 10 community plan meetings. We had a lot of the community members engaged and participating. We had over 500 folks attend those meetings. But we recognized that it was a challenge for members of our hard to reach communities to attend. And so our approach was to go to where the community is gathering. And so we went to pop-up events at farmers markets or grocery stores, or worked with our faith-based communities to go to where the communities are gathering. And we provided translation in Spanish and Russian and Chinese and Vietnamese, and distill kind of our general plan issues and education materials into a way that the community could understand them and provide us their feedback. And then beyond that, we really felt that it was really critical to engage with youth. And so we created an ambassador program where we hired youth for a summer to have them develop a survey and reach out to their peers and help us identify their views on climate change and what are some of the key things that we could do to improve our environment. And we also went to the high schools. We needed to go to where the students are. It's hard for them to come to us. And so we partnered with the University of Berkeley White Plant Program. They're working closely with schools in the Sacramento City Unified School District. And they have developed a specific curriculum around our general plan, our climate action plan. And my staff attended and gave presentations to the students. And they were planning around light rail stations and coming up with their own ideas on how they could change their own behavior to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So we really, our approach was, not just to create events, but to go to where the community is gathering at that time, and to try to have as broad of an outreach approach as we can, to provide childcare events or family-friendly events, to provide food, to try to eliminate the barriers that are in place for people to participate, and to try to make them feel as welcome as possible.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Thanks, Remy.
Thank you.
Alberto, another question?
Yes, sorry, thank you. I wanted to follow up kind of along the same lines as Lori was asking, and that is, Remy, so if your cap is not finalized until sometime in 2021, thinking specifically of future development, given that the built environment was such a big topic for us, how does the city deal with development projects that may come forth prior to that plan being approved? I mean, I'm thinking of, to the extent that there is stimulus funding to try to restart our economy, there may be some projects that may come in prior to that final cap. So what happens to them?
Do you have any specific project examples that you're thinking of?
Not at the moment, but I'm thinking again, a housing development or something that, one of the criteria or one of the goals that the commission had was any future development would be fully electrified, no more natural gas. So presumably that would be captured in your cap, which would govern that development. But if it happens prior to the cap being approved.
I see. So if an ordinance were in place in advance of the cap, then development could be subject to that ordinance, even if the cap is not adopted. Yeah.
I guess what we're all curious about, though, is can the city move sooner on the ordinance? And I think that's something we can address in our near-term recommendations if the commission wants to. And I would encourage the advocate groups to get after the city on it as well. Okay, any other questions? Okay, it's a good discussion. Thank you. Thanks, Remy. We'll
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Commissioners.
Hearing from you in June.
Absolutely.
All right, next we'll hear from David Tilley, who's the principal planner with the city of West Sac on how they're doing on their climate action planning. David?
Yes, thank you, Chair Stossball. I enjoy being here again to go over our efforts. I was fully prepared to start engaging in many of the outreach efforts that Remy described until COVID hit. And so we shifted gears to start working on the technical details for our climate action plan, the inventory, gathering all the data from PG&E and solid waste and all of those things. Stuff we needed to do anyway. We just sort of reversed the order of some of that work, not knowing how long or any restrictions from COVID-19 would be happening, and then also to allow us to adapt to this new environment and doing things a lot more virtually. Through a sort of I think a fair, good stroke of scheduling, we now are, for all intents and purposes, doing a modest general plan update ourselves as it's related, since it's housing element season right now. So since that is something that we absolutely positively have to do and it has a hard and fast deadline on it, we're actually going to work through that effort to sort of piggyback a lot of our climate outreach through our housing element work, because the two are really inextricably linked. And a subset of that is also when you are doing our SB 1000 work for environmental justice. All of these things are interrelated in my mind, and so we're going to pursue chasing all of these things down, all sort of en masse, so that we're not having duplicative efforts. I largely am the team working on these matters. So we're going to proceed on those levels, but the timing of all this, even though the COVID has been obviously really created a lot of problems for a lot of efforts, and there are some silver linings that have coming out of it, because now we can look at these things a lot more holistically through the general plan level, and then hopefully carry an environmental justice lens through the general plan, particularly as it relates to climate. I think we've talked about that quite a bit through the commission process, that the two are really one and the same. So that's why I'm actually feeling even more invigorated now than even before about going on these things, because we're going to be able to achieve, I think, multiple goals through one sort of singular effort. I think many folks know housing element this time around has a direct tie-in to climate through SB 379. So we'll be working on that as well. And all of these things are all intertwined. It's a perfect Venn diagram for the work that we need to be doing anyway. And now we can make sure that climate is accounted for in those from those different lenses, and it's not just the technical exercise of calculating your emissions and then what your reduction strategies are going to be. We really believe that we need to get maximum community buy-in on climate-related matters, including what this commission has developed over since its inception for these efforts to have maximum results. So we really want to approach it from that lens. We still have to do all the technical work and all the number crunching and all that stuff, but that can be sort of done more behind the scenes. I am looking forward to deploying some of the virtual tools, a la what Remy is doing here over the next several months, and then hopefully being able to resume going to some pop-up type events and things, assuming those are permissible by the time that rolls around. We had planned to hit a lot of stuff in the spring leading up to Earth Day. Unfortunately, all those events had to go by the wayside due to COVID. But it doesn't mean we give up. We just have to employ different strategies and keep things moving as best as possible. But now that the housing element work and the other associated general plan work are coming now to a head, we can combine all of these efforts largely into one, and then likely get a better product and effort at the end than we otherwise would have before. So that's sort of my short update from where things are at. Definitely COVID, there's no doubt that it's impacted us a little bit, but doesn't mean that we are not doing it. We still are, just doing it differently.
Okay, thank you, David. I want to welcome Commissioner Dave Tanner, who joined recently as well. Questions for David? Well, I don't see any. I guess they all went to Remy.
Well, Remy did a good job, and he definitely covered a lot of things that very similar to us. So I'm just glad to hear his presentation also.
Thanks for all your work, David, and you, Remy, as well. Okay, next we'll move on to our first action item, which is the final strategy recommendations from our Equity Technical Advisory Committee. So much thoughtful work has gone into these recommendations, as well as the supporting ideas and suggestions for implementation. So I'm excited that we're getting closure on these. Jackie Cole, who most of you know from VG Consulting, also served as the facilitator for the equity tax. So she's going to present the recommended strategies as well as the tax recommended implementation tactics. But I want to remind the commissioners, we will be voting only on the high level strategies. The tactics are supporting information to inform the decision making. So we'll hear from Jackie, then Kate will give us a summary of the public comment that has come in on this issue, and then we will move to discussion and hopefully action. Okay, Jackie. Hello.
Sorry, I was still muted on my end and definitely talking to myself for a second there, so apologies.
Welcome.
Thank you, and thank you, Anne and commissioners. As you've already indicated, Jackie Cole, Veritable Good, was pulled into this effort to help facilitate the conversation around how we can build equity into all of the recommendations that have been coming out of the Mayor's Climate Commission. And I would like to also extend a very large level of gratitude for all of the folks that were able to participate in that discussion. We had to be sort of nimble as we were pulling folks in and navigating through that conversation. And it was very nuanced and very complex. And the overarching theme that came out of that conversation was how urgent it is that we make sure that this is baked into the process. So just wanted to say thank you to everyone who managed to share a little bit of time with us. It's not perfect, but we hope to have the continued support and participation of the folks who helped us in that discussion to continue developing, improving, and working with us on implementation strategies as we move forward. I don't have a screen in front of me because I accidentally fried my laptop today, so I'm just going to say next slide and hope that that happens. So next slide, the equity recommendations. So we really focused in on these top three: operationalizing equity, community engagement, and building community capacity. Specifically around operationalizing equity, focusing in on the education that's required both for the community and for decision-making bodies to make sure that we have a common understanding about what that actually looks like, and ensuring that, you know, this is a shared decision-making process, nothing about the community without the community. And then also making sure that we're paying attention to the fact that this is going to require some resources. So how we want to allocate those funds, and ultimately that we're trying to address the historical and current disparities, which is actively being reflected in the COVID crisis, as we see that the communities who are most deeply impacted are in our most marginalized communities. The second one, authentically and inclusively involving marginalized communities and populations that have historically been left out of the policymaking and governance process, and making sure that they're co-creators in all phases of the planning and implementation, and doing that in order to ensure that we are really striving for fair and equitable outcomes. And really and truly, we have the capacity to demonstrate what this model could actually look like, and it's really just about all of us coming together to make it happen. And then building the capacity of cultural brokers and community-based organizations that have established relationships with marginalized communities already, and leveraging existing community engagement efforts whenever possible. And this is mostly just about making sure that communities are prepared to lead and to participate in these processes. And then also, you know, in leveraging existing efforts, just trying to reduce the redundancy that leads to extreme levels of community engagement fatigue. Next slide. So for the first equity recommendation, operationalizing equity by providing, you know, education, I would like to highlight that one of the first things that we are, you know, looking to do is to make sure that we are defining marginalized populations. In our conversations, we identified a number of resources that are available, but quite specifically, we wanted to make sure that we're engaging with community leaders to ensure that any definitions that are developed are properly vetted prior to adoption. And Kate can dig into a little bit more of what that actually looks like, since it's a part of the year one project. And then next up is, you know, prioritizing resource allocations to identified marginalized communities. And really, you know, in my humble opinion, that's going to be the best return on your investment, putting those resources up front where they are most needed. Invest in continuous equity education for city staff and elected officials. You know, ultimately, we want to ensure we want to increase our collective understanding of the root causes of systemic racial inequity and develop opportunities to address it. And that will require a continuous education model and training. Access the racial and socioeconomic impacts of climate action policies. This is mostly, you know, just looking at what the resources that are available. We looked at some information from the cities of Seattle, from PolicyLink and Race Forward, and really just want to emphasize the necessity of a tool like racial impact assessments as climate policies are being adopted and implemented. And then establishing a public dashboard. This is really just about providing accountability and transparency, creating a centralized space where we are sharing data, identifying targets, and ultimately the goal is to help reduce disparities. Next slide. The second recommendation, authentically and inclusively involving marginalized communities and populations. As has already been articulated, what we want to focus on is removing barriers that hinder residents from participating in community engagement activities. And we know that transportation is an issue, childcare is an issue, Language access is an issue, adequate meeting notice, and accessibility needs. And somebody made a comment to me earlier today that, even de-wonking the language would be helpful, as advocates have been trying to respond in the public comments. They're very smart and educated people who are still having to take some time out to work their way through these recommendations. So making sure that as we're sharing out this information, that it's digestible for all people. Partner with and fund community-based organizations. And this is really just providing an opportunity to expand the education for community members on processes. And we even had conversations about what it would look like to hire community-based organizations for some of the community engagement, specifically in marginalized and underserved communities. Coordinate across city departments and with regional partners. We've got the county, the air district, SACOG, utilities, a lot of folks who are putting a lot of brain power into what this is ultimately going to look like, which should provide us with a very comprehensive approach. And, we were even having a conversation about as the COVID impacted communities are disproportionately located in underserved communities, that the underlying issue of air quality. So what would it look like for us to get more air monitors in those communities? And then identify sustainable funding sources. I don't think I really need to dig into that. We're all sort of nervous about what that's going to look like, but how can we all sort of chip in together to make this a robust effort? And then establishing an environmental justice collaborative governance committee. This was really just in recognizing that we will probably need to be in partnership with counties to help support marginalized communities, in particular communities of color and youth. But we want to create some ownership for community members as we're asking them to participate in this shift and these new implementation measures and these new policies and these new environmental solutions. And again, the objective is to create solutions with the community, not just for the community, and to develop implementation of climate action plans and SB 1000 goals, are really just identifying that alignment. And also should mention that the Environmental Justice Collaborative Governance Committee is a year one project as well, which Kate can also dig into. Next slide. The final recommendation, building up the capacity of cultural brokers and community-based organizations. Everything that we really need is already on the table. We just need to figure out how we're going to pick it up. So one of the first things that we're talking about is identifying existing cultural brokers and community-based organizations that are already engaging with marginalized communities. We have neighborhood associations, schools, service providers, but also taking a look at some of the non-traditional approaches. There are a lot of cultural community hubs like barber shops that we don't think about when we're trying to identify other ways to be more inclusive in our efforts. Convening cultural brokers for a series of roundtables to inform the Environmental Justice Collaborative Governance Committee, and that is to help collaboratively develop a long-term strategic plan and to assess the resources that are needed to address the cumulative impacts of institutional and structural inequality. We are also trying to figure out how can we increase institutional memory and coordination across city departments. Ultimately to help reduce community engagement fatigue. And then cultivating advocates. We wanted to focus specifically on youth advocates and building up their capacity to help champion these systemic shifts. These are really big, heavy lifts in trying to figure out how we prioritize equity. And we want to make sure that we're identifying or partnering rather with established environmental justice groups, and then trying to figure out how we can provide additional training and resources and funding that's going to be required to help us really move and push this forward. And then finally, reviewing existing models. We took a look at the Choice Neighborhoods Initiative. And this is really just to provide residents with the necessary resources and tools and templates to help them create plans for their own communities, providing the agency for them to start thinking about these things in a larger way without having to wait for cities or agencies to come and ask about what they need. They've got the information. It's just how can we help them to start thinking through some of these things on their own. That's about all that I have. But in closing, I just want to say thank you again to all of the Equity Technical Advisory members and the folks who managed to participate with us in that discussion. And thank you to the commissioners as well. And I just really want to encourage the commission to adopt the 3 strategy recommendations. And with that, I will turn it back over to Ann.
For all the work that's gone into this. Welcome to Commissioner Teal, who just joined. Okay, so now Kate will summarize the public comment that we've received on the equity item, and then we'll open it up for questions. Kate.
Sorry about that. I was just unmuting myself. So wanted to remind everybody that you have the live document, which has been collecting all the public input as it's come in. So I emailed that link to you all yesterday and I put it in the chat again. So I want to make sure you're looking at that as well. I'll do my best to represent what we've gotten in, but we want you to see the raw public comments as well. So we received 11 comments on this agenda item. We had a number of comments around transportation equity and the need to be really mindful of thinking about equity and the different mobility needs that people have, especially working citizens and lower income families. We had a number of comments about safeguarding existing transportation corridors, and a number mentioned Walnut Branch Line in particular. We saw emphasis around the need to make sure that the effort around implementation and any committee that we might move forward with includes truly representative members of all marginalized communities in decision making. We had a number of supportive comments around approving the equity recommendations overall. There was a comment about providing compensation for marginalized communities to be involved in the process, and highlighting the work that has been done by the city of Oakland to provide that compensation. There was a comment around shifting towards plant-based food consumption, looking at that connection between health and climate equity, some conversation around the fossil fuel plants in the Sacramento region and phasing away from having those plants, decommissioning those plants. And that is the high level we had from the 11 comments we received. Again, I encourage you to look at the full raw comments, but that's the high level overview and we can dive in from there, Ann.
Okay, thanks, Kate. Questions or comments from the commissioners on the presentation and the equity tax work? Okay, I'm seeing none.
And a reminder for the commissioners that just jumped on, go ahead and raise your hand through the Zoom function and we'll call on you in that way.
Yeah, thanks, Kate, for that reminder.
Okay. Alberto?
Hi, thanks, Kate. And I was respectfully giving time to other commissioners in case you wanted to entertain them first. But I do have a question for Jackie.
Nope. Okay, you're the only one with the hand up right now. Okay. So please proceed.
So first of all, I wanted to thank Jackie and the Equity TAC for all the excellent work that they've done. I mean, what they presented to us is absolutely right on target. And the reason I can say that is because as many of you might remember from previous comments at the commission, and my question to Jackie specifically, as you know, we are, as an air district, trying to implement the new state community air protection program. The enabling statute, Assembly Bill 617, called for very explicitly a community steering committee to help guide the actions by the Air District and the state. And if I can be perfectly honest, and I wanted to get your reactions in terms of some of the recommendations that you've made for this particular commission are totally on target for some of the things that we should be doing as the air agency implementing AB 617. But I can honestly tell you that we've had over a year a process of close to 20 community meetings thus far. And two of the key barriers that continue to get in front of us and progress are just the fundamental process of building trust. And then from the community side, the real time intensive effort that it takes for somebody from the community to be plucked out of that environment and then be brought into something like, climate mitigation strategies. I mean, to be able to have a meaningful engagement as you're calling for, it takes, as we're finding, much more time on the community member side than we anticipated. And the time really is needed so that you can develop the capacity so that we can talk apples to apples. And I would love to get some recommendations and ideas from you in terms of, the cultural brokers and the CBOs perhaps is a good example of a potential solution in terms of creating a bridge so that those of us on this side can actually reach the community. But I wanted to get your reaction to see in terms of, how do we move forward now that you've got those great recommendations on the table for us? What would be effective from your perspective?
Thanks. Jackie?
Thank you, first of all, for the question. And as you've indicated, this is a problem across the board. And repairing the trust in these communities is going to take a lot. In my very humble opinion, in terms of, an approach and providing capacity building opportunities for community members to participate in those spaces, you have to make it as hard as you possibly can for them to say no. And that means providing them with the resources that they need to actually participate in those spaces. And there's also, this is a very comprehensive approach that we're looking at right now, which means all of us need to talk to underserved communities right now. And it's not fair for us to demand their attention in so many different spaces at once. I get paid to do this, and it makes my head spin sometimes when I think about all of the different efforts and all of the different spaces that are required. But overwhelmingly, what I've heard from community members when they're trying to figure out where they fit in and how they can participate and, so on and so forth, a lot of it's barriers in communication. So even as some of the community members were taking a look at the recommendations, it takes more time for them to digest the information and to figure out what it means to their life, what it means for their community members, and then for them to communicate that out into their own communities. And, sometimes 2 weeks isn't enough time, for folks to turn around to provide that sort of feedback. So it's a number of different things that need to be addressed, but you have to allocate some resources to that. If you want to have an informed conversation, then you need to focus your resources on how you're going to inform the community. And the reason why some of the trust is so broken in some of these spaces is because we don't make time for that. We just keep it pushing and we just keep it moving. And that makes community members feel like their contributions aren't valuable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. Commissioner Pope Hardin and then Commissioner Bray.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie, and everybody on the Equity TAC for facilitating this conversation. I think I just want to say, comment, not a question, that trust is built over time. And I think it's really important to use this as an opportunity to not just have this TAC inform, or I'm sorry, the equity group, the EJ group inform just this process, but it is something that needs to be operationalized throughout the two cities, something that is sustainable, longstanding, and has funding, and needs to be integrated in all parts, because trust is built over time. And we talk now about how there's that knowledge gap in the community. Over time, if this becomes sustainable, that also will decrease. And just like this is a plan for 2030 and 2040, we need to be thinking of this EJ group the same way. That it's something that's going to be lasting until 2030, 2040. And it might even be advantageous at another part to make benchmarks for what we want to see that EJ group do at some point.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Naila. Commissioner Bray.
So I think the other piece of it, time is absolutely critical, but the other piece is that there's a lot of fatigue out in communities around engagement, because there are a whole bunch of entities, organizations, institutions that are trying to plumb the innovation and expertise that exists in those communities without resourcing them. They want to come in and they want to get as much knowledge and information as they can, but not give them any money. And not, I'm just being real. When these very entities, they're the ones that have the money, and they'll go invest them in other communities, but they won't invest them in those communities. But they want the benefit of their engagement. And engagement is a nice way of putting it, because there's engagement, there's consultation, but then there's co-creation. And that's what people really want. They want an opportunity not only be heard, but to be understood and to be included in whatever solutions are being created. And if you can get to that point where they're willing to do that with you, then you will have succeeded.
Thank you. Okay, does anyone else have questions or comments? I want to thank Jackie and the TAC members and several of the commissioners, you know who you are, who put a lot of time and effort into this. I hope that we have a really good product. I know that I have learned so much from all of you through this. I hope we have the strategies right, their words in a report, and the important thing is going to be really translating that information for the cities. I think it's going to take conversations, not just submitting the report. So I hope that we can continue to be part of that. As Jackie mentioned, in the year one recommendations, we're suggesting that the commission recommend very soon that the cities would put this EJ governance committee in place, and that it would be co-created. And in fact, the words I've learned and the concept I've learned from Commissioner Bray is that the city's role should be to facilitate, but not to influence. And that will be so important. Anyway, I very much support the recommendations, and I hope that there will be a motion to move them forward. I see Commissioner Ledesma has his hand up. You need to unmute your...
I think people like it better when I'm muted and talking, so we'll see how this goes.
Oh.
But thanks for all the work on this, on these recommendations, and to the team that's been working on them behind the scenes. And the message is timely now. Everything's we started this endeavor, obviously climate change and how we address the inequities that are brought by this were forefront in our mind. But I think it's actually the focus of this has become even more clear because of COVID and its implications in communities. And I know us in West Sacramento are really focused on, as I'm sure our colleagues in Sacramento are, just the immediate needs of the community on COVID related issues. And it's going to change how we look at things going forward. And I think this is applicable to those efforts. As we've dealt with in the immediate time since the shelter in place orders have been put in place, things like transit and changes the transit, we've had to have that prism of equity and the things we are talking about here in mind. We just can't shut down transit services for those who need them. We just can't, we can't make those decisions without thinking about the principles that we're going to be talking about or voting on here in a second. So I just appreciate the focus on this. And again, I think it's applicable. And I know the question came up earlier about how we implement this going forward. This should be in every conversation we have, because it is going to be a bunch of different ways we implement climate change recommendations through whether transit moves or through air quality or whatever the specific subject is. So this does translate to that. But thanks for all the work. And with that, I'll make the motion to approve the recommended actions, the recommended priorities.
Great. Is there a second? Thank you, Commissioner Ledesma.
Second.
Is that, sorry, who seconded?
Me, Stephanie.
Commissioner Ray. Great. And then Commissioner Orchard, were you trying to second or was your hand up?
I was just trying to second. I had nothing to add to the great conversation.
Okay. All right. Anything else before we vote? Okay. All those in favor, and you need to raise your hand for vote the same way you do for speaking, for voting.
Should we do a roll call vote, Madam Chair?
Yeah, that might be easier. Julia, can you do that? Julia Kim?
Of course, I'm happy to. So I'll run down.
Thank you. It's a good idea.
A good idea. Sorry, I had to mute everyone, so you'll have to unmute yourself. Sorry about the feedback there. So this motion came from Commissioner Ledesma, seconded by Commissioner Bray. So we'll first pass it to Chair Ann Snospel.
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Ayala?
Aye.
Commissioner Blackwood?
Aye.
Commissioner Wick?
Aye.
Commissioner Orchard?
Aye.
Commissioner Tanner? Commissioner Tanner?
Aye.
Commissioner Lee?
Aye.
Commissioner Corliss?
Aye.
Commissioner Weiser?
Aye.
Commissioner Arnold?
Aye.
Commissioner Teal?
Nay.
Commissioner Mohana? Or apologies, Commissioner Pope, pardon?
Aye.
Commissioner Mohana?
Aye.
Commissioner Hanson?
Aye.
Commissioner Rodriguez?
Aye.
And Chair, I'll turn it back to you. That's the list. I will note that Commissioner Nelson was not able to join yet, so we don't have his vote.
Okay. Thanks, Julia, and thanks again to all who participated in putting this together. Just one comment, and then I see a couple of hands up. I do think when we get later in the agenda to where we're talking about the report itself, I'll try to ask then, but I'd really like to hear if folks think we captured, not the language of the strategies, because that's verbatim, but whether we captured the tone around equity in a way that accurately reflects how the commission feels. Commissioner Wick, did you want to speak?
I actually was, I raised my hand for voting before we went to the roll call vote, so I actually don't need to speak.
Okay, and Commissioner Teal?
Thanks. I would like the opportunity to explain my nay vote.
Yep.
And I apologize for coming in late. So I assume we are voting on the inequities piece. Is that correct?
Yes.
The recommendation. Okay. I have some serious concerns about the inequities, but at this point, it's probably it's not worth the effort to oppose anything. But I would like to share my thinking with the group. It's post-COVID thinking, and I'm very, very concerned that we don't have a clue yet of what the environment is going to be like post-COVID, both in lifestyle, changes in work habits, changes in how we travel and live. And some of our recommendations on the bigger plan are causing us to put more people into denser populated cities and urban areas. And what's going to happen the next time around if it's worse, if it's a worse virus that hits us? Are we going to be ready for that? And who's going to be hurt the most? It's not going to be me. It's not going to be those who are wealthy or who live in the suburbs, who have second homes in other areas. And I'm very concerned about the inequities of some of our actions or decisions and recommendations coming forward. And I would ask the commission to keep that in mind. And I think it's good that you've added to the report that we do need to think in terms of the things that we don't know based on our experiences of the last 4 months. We have no idea what the economic impact is going to be, over the next 3 to 5 years. It may be really, really serious. And what is it going to do to the cities? We also don't know whether our immunities are going to be maintained. Is this going to be like the flu? We get it, every year, or what? We don't have a clue yet. So I'm concerned about the impact that this new environment has on some of our recommendations. And that's why I can, in all good conscience, vote yes. Thank you very much for the time to share my thoughts.
Okay, thank you for sharing. Okay, our next item is from the SAC Metro Chamber. After a series of business roundtables and a lot of thought, the Chamber put together a summary of business concerns, if you will, and issues that they have raised after reviewing our recommendations, some positive and some not so positive. So I want to thank the Amanda and Erica and Meg Arnold, Commissioner Arnold, who helped put it together, as well as Julia Burrows from the Mayor's Office, and of course LGC. For assisting in this effort. Obtaining input from the business community was always an important goal for us. But I guess as Commissioner Teal just said, given the pandemic, there are additional concerns all around, including from business, that need to be taken into account. So the detailed report from the Chamber will be included in the supplemental report that will go to the cities along with the Commission report. And what we wanted to do today, though, is brief you all on the content of that report. So Erica Bjork has graciously agreed to do that, and I will turn it over to her.
Thank you, Anne.
There you are.
I have a few just simple slides that Julia, thank you. I'll try and give you some cues on. So again, I want to thank the Commission for your time, and again, including the Metro Chamber. I'm going to try and stay very high level and brief here. We have a more detailed response in the report we provided on the staff of the Climate Commission. That's in the supplemental materials, where we try to address on a fairly detailed basis many of the recommendations and the tactics and some of the direct feedback we had from our business community and or some kind of general recommendations that went with it. Julie, go ahead and we can go to the next slide. So again, we were engaged by both Mayor Steinberg's staff and office and the Climate Commission to host a series of roundtables. There are two kind of key areas we really were asked to focus on and put a series of roundtables together that was very much on the built environment, which represented everything from restaurants, catering, breweries, developers, contractors, designers, again, many of the both big and small businesses that tie to it, including many of our healthcare partners as well that are in this space. And then the other being mobility. So this includes everything from rideshare, bike advocates, our PBIDs, technology, utility, and similar. And we did make an effort to ensure that we had representation from both the city of Sacramento and West Sacramento and their businesses, both large, small, and similar. Julia, let's go to the next slide. So I want to start a little bit in just the context and kind of to echo what Commissioner Teal had mentioned of, I cannot stress enough the importance of, as you look at both year one recommendations and as you look to next steps, that you take the context of COVID-19 has had an impact on our business community. So this is a group, I don't think I need to give a lot of high level stats on our unemployment rates and the impacts on our business. But, you know, just to give a small element, you know, our Midtown alone has 900 small businesses, and they have been hit probably the hardest along with their workforce with that. 95%, if not more, have been affected by this. And to give it maybe in a little context for the our SBDC and for the Metro Chamber, when we set up initially a hotline and resources to our small businesses to call in, the initial calls were very much about like, you know, do I fall under the governor's guidelines? Can I operate? You know, what can I do to get PPP funding? We are now training our staff on how to deal with mental health and to help these business owners that are literally dealing with depression, some that have talked in the realms of suicide, because as they are seen, as their businesses are closing, their identity is also being affected, let alone their means and their income and their employees. We are in a very fragile state with our business community. So anything we can do, our time and our effort and our resources should be literally probably 100% focused on both the restart and the recovery to our economy. And for a lot of this, we just don't know what it is gonna look like. So as you look towards things and recommendations or next step, please, please keep this in mind heavily. And it's not to say that, again, I think we have an incredibly, our business community as a whole is incredibly minded to the means and the essence of what a vibrant community looks like, both in our air quality and our climate and our environment. Green Means Go is one of the policy priorities for the Metro Chamber. And we have a very forward mind, I think, community from the business community in that regard. We saw this with the impact on our air quality from the fires and what it meant for our productivity, to even how we're seeing right now with our reduced congestion because of teleworking. So it is not that this is not a priority for our businesses, but right now it is literally about survival. And that is the first and foremost thing on their mind. So let's go to the next slide, Julia. So I'm just going to highlight and touch upon a couple really high level key insights. Again, I am very much open to questions, whether it's online or offline, and can give more specific examples if need be. One thing I do want to kind of share with this commission is in our roundtables, we were very much dealing probably a little bit more with input and feedback to some of the tactics and the recommendations that were already kind of decided, as opposed to maybe bringing new ideas to the table, of which there was a variety of which our business community did share or really drive to be considered. So, I mean, first and foremost, I think one of our concerns goes with just, you know, how are we using data to drive the priorities and the impact, and really focusing on the economic ROI for all of this. So we understand that a majority of the emissions come from both our building and our transportation. But again, how are we applying the data into reducing these emissions for the biggest impact? If converting all of our kitchens from, you know, gas to electric, what truly is going to be the impact on that for lowering our emissions? I will use some data in the report and what the city of Sacramento has done. You know, they had a 24% reduction of their GHG emissions from 2005 to 2013. And some of their key actions were just increasing tree canopy and launching things like electric bike share and electric car share. So again, I think there are some easy examples both from past and looking ahead that we can do to really have this kind of impact as a whole without huge major shifts that put a burden on business. The other thing too, I think is important when you look at the data is I believe very little in the report really addressed what I'll call the drive-through traffic, which I believe was upwards of maybe 25% of our emissions. So again, as we kind of look at things, let's look at the big picture and where we can have the most impact based on those data-driven decisions. The next being, again, a business case. This is a situation, I think, time and time again for our business community. When you have a business case tied to it, they will line up in droves to support it. We have developers that would love to build near transit-oriented development, that would love to build by infill. It is also incredibly expensive to do so because of the upgrades to the infrastructure that comes from that, much of which is a burden on our developers. So again, when there's a business case made to this, you're gonna have no problem at all with both the business community leading this, let alone driving this. This is things, again, really please be mindful of. If anything, and we're seeing this with COVID and going back to Mike's comments is, for some of these mandates and these high, goals of 90% of all growth being established in center and corridor communities, we may realize and decide through all this that we look at where are we putting, maybe we're putting the job centers near where the workers live, as opposed to trying to drive where the housing is near where the work, the jobs are. So again, I think with the context of COVID, a lot of this is going to change, and really, again, recommend that we look at it from, again, how are we making the business case and the economic investment case to it, not just the climate case. Investment in innovation. A lot of the recommendations and the tactics that come in that are driven by outside technology, resources, and industry that we have absolutely no control over. So when you talk about 100% fleet vehicles that are being run on electric, that is not necessarily something either of our cities can control. What we can do is we can invest in innovation here locally, including future mobility. That might drive that towards the future. But again, sending those kind of mandates really, again, can handicap our businesses, and at the end of the day will probably drive business away. There was, again, in the residential building electrification in California study, it cited things like a lot of the recommendations and things we are seeing overseas in Europe, we don't have here yet. We don't have the high efficiency electric technologies that we see. Many of our builders and our contractors and our developers talked about, they are actually being more energy efficient using gas boilers and similar as opposed to electric, just because of where technology is currently. We also have many builders that told us that they are doing everything they can to build all electric, but again, the technology and the infrastructure doesn't exist yet for California and for the US. And then again, when we talk about investment and innovation, more than anything, if there is a place that both of our cities can do that in, it's really investing in the infrastructure in the ground. So again, this includes fiber, 5G on the long-term level, our sewer, and yes, our electricity. All are key things that we can invest now in our infrastructure that will also help, again, lead the business case later. I think this is a business 101, carrot, not the stick. So incentives are important to driving adoption, but they're not the only thing. And when we are doing incentives, we also need to be, keep in mind that these can't just be short-term incentives. This is not just you're getting $50 for getting a more energy efficient dryer or similar. If you are seeking incentives for our businesses, it has to be looking both in the immediate as well as the long-term to help support them and again, make that business case. One of the key things too, I want this group to be very mindful of is anytime you put the word mandate in there, it is automatically a barrier to business. So please be mindful of this, especially now. We have enough barriers that it is to operate in the state of California. So anything we can do to look at how we lift those barriers and lift those mandates, I think you will find actually we will do more for both our climate and our environment, as well as our business environment in that case, and the business case to it. Again, another example of this, just very briefly, is this idea of, again, buy local. I don't think we have a restaurant, a supplier, or anyone else who wouldn't love to just buy local. There doesn't need to be a mandate towards this. But we do need to be mindful of, we have a very complicated supply chain for our food. Case in point, we now have, because of the impact of COVID, Cisco is selling directly to consumers. We saw Golden One Center have high ambitions to try and source a majority of their products local. And again, there's other ways we can drive innovation and investment to lean towards that, but we don't have to mandate that our businesses buy local. This is something they've already made an imperative and want to do, but it has to be a little bit of a business case for it. We also have some great supply chain resources that are out there, like a Crop Mobsters, that can be a resource to us without having to have a mandate such as this. And again, talking about our cities need to walk the walk. So anything you are asking of our business community should also be asked of our cities and municipalities, whether this is looking at electrification or otherwise. Again, I applaud, both City of Sacramento and West Sacramento have done some immense investments in this. And again, whether this is energy efficiency upgrades to our libraries or our community centers, but again, let's look internally at what we can do as cities first before we look and have the expectation that should be on our business and our residents. I think, for the last two of our biggest concerns, one is this idea of resiliency, which everyone keeps talking about, and yet we are asking to be reliant on one form of energy, being electricity. We have seen, because of the brownouts and similar, that this can be, we'll just say, dangerous to both our environment as well as to our residents. But this is, the pandemic is not going to be our only crisis. So there is going to be a flood and a fire or anything else. And so I think we need to, when we talk about resiliency, really think about what that means as far as being 100% dependent on electricity. I think it is also important to know that as technology changes and our resources towards energy changes, electricity may not be the main thing that we are using even 20 years from now. Again, from, I think, I will say my old history lessons, being part of the reason that gas is in many of our buildings is because it was a cleaner resource than coal. So as we look towards innovation and how we can drive that, let's not be 100% reliant on one form of energy. Let's again look and see and have some variety that can allow us to do what is best for both the emissions and the environment, not just say it has to be 100% electric. And a key piece of this, and just from a practicality standpoint, is if we ever have to do an evacuation for a region because of a flood or a fire and everyone is reliant upon one form of charging our cars or anything else, it's going to be a problem. So diversity in that is always a good thing. And lastly is, again, going to the most recent kind of comments and feedback on inclusivity and equity and everything else is, again, just awareness and engagement does not do that. So I want to go back to Stephanie's comments about, again, this fatigue and engagement. Our neighborhoods most in need have been very well engaged. If you want to build trust, you need to invest in those neighborhoods, and very much I will say walk the walk. And again, mandating many of our small businesses, which are minority owned in many of these neighborhoods that need these resources the most, telling them that all of a sudden they need to convert their businesses to electric or their equipment or otherwise without providing them the resources and know-how is just not, it's not going to create equity. If anything, it is going to create a broadening gap in those groups. If anything, like any emerging technology, when you have access and you have it available at cost, is when you're going to see the most adaptation towards it. Doesn't matter if this is home, business, or otherwise. So again, just when we talk about, equity and inclusion, it needs to be more than just awareness and engagement. If we want to build trust again, let's look at and prioritize where that infrastructure goes in first in many of our neighborhoods. It doesn't matter if it's tree canopies, public transportation, access to broadband, and much of that data already exists. It isn't necessarily something that has to be duplicated by this commission. Let's go to the next slide, Julia. So I thought it was actually great that in the report, there was the comment that challenging times are uniquely opportune for assessing what's most critical, and that barriers are removed. And I will say in this age of COVID-19, something that we have seen and applaud both by our cities and many of our governments is they have realized there are many barriers they have had to remove from business in order for them to survive. And so I say this in the sense that the more flexibility sometimes you can provide our businesses, the more innovative they will be. We've seen this in our restaurant community and how they've been able to pivot. We were on a call this morning with ABC on many of the ways that they're looking to, again, remove even more restrictions and barriers so that our businesses can operate within that mindset for our bars and our restaurants and our breweries. Many of our businesses are looking for ways to be innovative and to drive and be leaders in this. And more often than not, we're finding some of those barriers actually exist in our, city levels. So a couple things I do want to touch upon and really kind of emphasize is, and these were some of the ideas from some of our businesses when we talked to them, is again, we are a city of trees. And we applaud many of the recommendations in here that go towards increasing those tree canopies, especially in the neighborhoods that need it most. This goes back to kind of economic ROI and data. The city of Linden increased their tree cover, and in doing so saved businesses $6.56 billion, in addition to an $11 billion in productivity. just by lowering the temperatures of offices and creating, again, better spaces for businesses. We have talked to select businesses that wanted to plant trees on their properties, both to create shade and to lower temperatures and to create a better environment. And we're told by cities they couldn't do it because it didn't fit within the general plan. So I share this in the sense of we can probably do and look at existing city ordinances and barriers that exist, and what can we just do to revise and update them to ensure that our businesses can take advantage and be innovative in the space. In addition, there's a variety of data that we'll talk about. We can raise property values by, again, investment in our trees and our tree canopies and similar, which is important when we talk about equity in our neighborhoods, let alone keeping high valuation for our property taxes. Food waste, again, I think is a great piece to this. Our restaurants are begging for both environmental and economic opportunities to take food waste and make it into green energy. So anything we can do to expand this, there have been programs in the past that have done this, ways that we have used innovation to do it. And again, I talk about it's a great example of a business case, both in saving the disposable costs for our restaurants, but also in helping our environment. And lastly is, again, let's look at smart design. So if it's green rooftops, if it's how we build, we have been talking for a while about how can we do self-certification for things like ADUs, which will put, again, building and housing on existing properties without, again, looking at having to have a bigger plan or solution. This saves time and money for those that are building it, and especially in our COVID-19 mindset could be huge. Julia, we can go ahead and kind of go to the last slide right now. So again, I think just I will say last thoughts as you guys talk about year one and near-term projects is timing is everything. So anything that, again, looks like you are putting up barriers to our businesses it's just not the time for it in the least bit. It may be worth looking at how much of some of these recommendations are saved for discussion and review once we know the context of what is going on with our environment and COVID-19 and how we adopt that. I can tell you right now, if it was adopted by the cities that we go to 100% electrification by 2023, we have people right now that can't pay their electric bills. So please be mindful of this. And then again, lastly, is really please look at the economic impact as well as the best impact for the environment using data to drive this. I think it'll be key and critical. There are opportunities. So in looking at innovation, we know, and again, probably one of the greatest ones is our country was electrified coming out of the New Deal. There is opportunity both in stimulus and otherwise to invest in some of these emerging technologies and infrastructure, which is where a lot of the time and the effort and the energy and the resources can go towards. But anything that is again, put up as a barrier to our businesses could be very much crippling, no matter how well intended to it. And with that, I'm available for questions or similar for anything if it's specific to the tactics, the recommendations, or just overall input.
Okay, thank you, Erica, very much for your presentation. It's obvious you put a lot of thought into that. Hard to hear, but we need to. Okay, questions and comments. Commissioner Corliss. I've got Corliss, Littman, Wick, and Teal.
Well, thanks, Erica. I think, it's interesting just hearing you talk about that and also adopting our equity principles and the action that we just took before that, because in some way, I think what we're saying is we need to act with a sense of urgency, and we need to make sure that we really don't harm people and businesses in doing that. And that's not an easy thing, right?
No.
And in some ways, and I'm sort of, forgive me for kind of thinking out loud, but I think this is our kind of our shared challenge in the near term. There are a lot of things that we want to do, and yet whoever bears the cost, it either will be inequitable or it'll put you out of work. But that incremental cost of doing things, let's take community car share. Like we would love to get electric vehicles into low-income neighborhoods, right, and at a low cost, and reduce that barrier. So there is a real, we would love to get people paying less energy bills, right? Your businesses would love to pay nothing more than a lower bill if we could actually figure out and sometimes it might be innovative financing, or it may need us to get creative. I guess what I'm just kind of urging us all to think about is that kind of incremental cost of making this shift and making sure that we're not putting it on the people that will bear it the most, but we're also we're very articulate and thoughtful and intentional about things like the climate resilience bond, if that goes to the ballot in November, and the state and federal government, and as we recover, how we recover, and how we prioritize some of the things we say we want to do without putting on the backs of disadvantaged communities, people of color, or small businesses. So it's really a statement. I'm sorry, I don't have a question for you, but you're prompting me to think, which I hope we all will, right, about this implementation after this commission winds up its work.
Yes, and James, the one comment I would make to that is, so one, again, I think a lot of tactics are well intended, but we know that, and we've been told multiple times they're recommendations, but we also know that once they're kind of put in writing and they are made as recommendations of this commission, there's a high likelihood they will make it into city general plans. And again, part of this is context and timing of everything. I think a great example, and I think one of the year one recommendations that we have seen huge success. So when you talk about transportation being a priority of the commission, the free transportation that was provided to Sac City Unified School District kids for our regional transit. So I'm going to try and recall the data to it specifically, but I believe overnight there was a 24% increase in usage on regional transit. And with that, the biggest thing and the most important thing was you saw an increase in usage over the Christmas holiday. Kids were using it when they didn't have to use it to, say, go to school or similar. And I think to us, we look at that as you're creating new riders, new adoption, and similar, no matter where they come from in the school district. I think that is a good, we'll say, if you want to look at tactic, that has helped both those dealing with inequality while creating an adoption of future public transit riders. Those may be things that, again, from a sense of urgency, that we will absolutely need going into whatever 2021 looks like. But also, again, being mindful of where the burden lies on the user or otherwise. For creative financing, I will say this is, we are finding this with our PPP programs and our business loans, as many of our small minority-owned businesses have no access to capital. And they don't have the system set up that most of us would think of for our businesses to be able to finance these kinds of investments and capital improvements. Part of it, and it goes back to trust in some communities, they do not trust financial partners, they don't trust government. The other aspect to this is literally just not having the relationships with banks and similar. So in some of our conversations and recommendations, it was mentioned like, oh, well, we'll provide incentives. If you need to have electric landscape equipment, we'll give you rebates to this or initial buys. Again, there's both short-term and long-term implications to this, which I kind of go back to, like any emerging technology, when you have access and it is affordable and cost-efficient to all folks. Look at cell phones now. Everybody has a cell phone. Is a great example of ways that we can get, again, these kinds of technologies in use and more electric equipment into the hands of those that need it most.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner Lippman, and then Wick and Teal.
I just want to say that COVID has been an immense disruption of everything that we do and know. And and we're going to have to rebuild in lots of ways. And so it's so important that we rebuild in a way that is green and builds the world that we need, because this short-term disruption, no matter how long it is not going to be as big as climate change disruptions. And our timeline, as you said, timing is everything. Our timeline is a decade to change things around, to at least cut 50% of our emissions. So we've got to look at it. We've got to be creative. We've got to not look at it as either or. We've got to make the changes. We've got to lean into these changes that have happened with COVID and rebuild, not step back. We need to solve the climate crisis while we're solving the COVID crisis. And it's up to us to be that creative, to be able to find a way to do both at the same time. It would be a dereliction of everything that we want to do to use COVID as an excuse to not do everything possible to address the climate crisis.
Thank you. Commissioner Wick?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I just would like to first thank the Business Roundtable and the speaker. I apologize that I'm not able to see your name, but I really appreciated your presentation. It really helps me as a commissioner to really see from the business side, and it really helps me to bring everything into full focus and the full picture of how these recommendations interrelate to different communities. I think, what really stood out for me in this presentation was the idea of buy-in. And we talked a lot about that in the equity TAC as well, about how we don't want the groups who are going to have to bear who have traditionally borne the biggest burden of climate change or government overregulation or underregulation in some ways, to have a disproportionate impact. And we also don't want people to feel like these recommendations is something that's just happening to them without their input. When she was speaking about, that not every business has access to capital or can't just, do some of the rebates that we think some of us may, without a business background, think are easy. Why can't you just switch out your electric with something else? Not everybody has access to those resources. So thinking about that, the hard part is ahead of us. The implementation piece is ahead of us. Those of us who have put this 18-month investment in have been playing the long game for a while. And we know that this is going to take a strong, public and private partnership. And the other thing that stood out for me in her presentation was really the idea that the business community is diverse. It's not just, EJ versus businesses or big business, or, when we talk about business, I think some of us from activist communities think of like big business, and we think about, the people who have maybe presented the most disproportionate impacts toward the climate crisis, and we get upset about, wanting to make sure that there's more equitable spread. But really, I was really appreciating what she was saying about small businesses and minority-owned businesses, because we don't want to forget that, the business community is being really hit hard, and it's a really painful time right now for a lot of our neighborhood businesses that we rely on for our services. So I just want to thank the Business Roundtable for your work, and I'm really looking forward to this implementation phase where we can really continue to engage with each other and remember that it's going to take multiple stakeholders to really make this happen, and to remember that we want to make sure that we're authentically engaging everyone at every level, so that we can get the best outcome that reflects, the true needs in our community.
Thank you, April. Well said. Commissioner Teal?
Thank you, Chairwoman. I'd like to underscore the idea and concern that the Chamber has raised with regards to going to one form of energy. I think if there's anything that we've learned in the recent months, it's that depending on one source for a very critical part of our society, medicine, was a mistake. And I'm worried that having one source of fuel and energy is not a wise decision for us all. And I think we need to think about that in light of recent events. I also don't think that it's going to be equitable, because I think it's going to be easiest within the inner city to eliminate and go 100% electricity. And when that electricity fails, if it does fail, and I'm not like Arlen, an expert on infrastructure for electricity, but it certainly will fail at one point. And guess who's going to take the brunt of that? And so I think we need to think of that too. Thank you.
I think we might want to come back to a conversation on that, but I'm going to go through the queue right now, and then if commissioners want to talk about the that single source issue, we can. Well, how convenient. The next person is Commissioner Orchard. And then I have Pope Hardin, Mohana, and Blackwood.
So it's not a surprise I have an opinion on this issue. So Erica, thank you. I think this is great work, and I think it's critical that we hear the voice of business in all of these decisions, especially since they're the folks that put people to work each and every day. And I certainly appreciate the criticality of the situation that all businesses, both small and large, are in right now with COVID. And we certainly hear from our customers the pain that is out there. So I just a few thoughts on this. I think that just as I think about the 2023 date, which I believe is the recommendation, I believe that is focused on new construction. And we have currently had great success working with our developers in getting them to transition to all electric homes and all electric subdivisions, largely because it's cheaper. It's cheaper for them and it's cheaper for the customer. So it saves about $9,000 per home to go all electric. So we've had, with very little push, quite frankly, really strong uptake. So I think there's a cost benefit to moving in that direction. I think the harder nut is, and I think it's really what the heart of this is what is the path to transition others to cleaner fuel? It may be that, I know we have pretty aggressive goals, and I don't think it's necessarily a one size fits all. And I think when you're looking at the issue of the transition, I do think it needs to be done with through innovation and through incentives. The burden on not only homeowners, but businesses through something that just mandates they adopt a new technology, I think is problematic. And I know we've certainly taken the tact that both in looking at, because it's going to, regardless, as we make this transition, necessitate co-investment with either business or homeowners or property owners to get that done, I think. So I think the idea of figuring out how to do it in a way that creates more carrots, I think is important. That's certainly been our strategy at SMUD in the in looking forward to the how do you transition the existing buildings to a cleaner fuel source. And it's not always everything has to transition either. For example, if you're a homeowner and your hot water heater goes out, we really want to encourage you not to do a gas hot water heater. There's an alternative that will actually save you money and is better for the environment. So even if we're looking at those incremental steps with an incentive, I think that that's something that should be embraced. And I think there's going to be a lot of innovation over the next several years that will actually effectively lower the costs for homeowners who are adopting these new technologies and also for businesses. And then I don't want to lose the fact, because it's something that we're struggling with, is as you're looking at disadvantaged communities, their ability to co-invest in these cleaner appliances, et cetera, is more challenged. So I think there is going to need to be considerably more community support and financial support for those communities to successfully transition. And I feel very strongly that it shouldn't be a transition that is only focused on more affluent neighborhoods. So I think you've made a lot of great points. I do feel like I will address my friend Mr. Teal's single source comment. And I guess I would say, from the standpoint of it really isn't, electricity isn't a single source, because there are multiple ways that you create electricity. You create them through biogas and natural gas and solar, and they come from multiple sources. So you really aren't tied to a single source when you're thinking about providing electricity. It is much less a single source risk than simply relying on natural gas to fuel your home, because you have multiple opportunities to provide that. But it is something that does need to be thought about, and that's why there are technologies around storage and things like that that are emerging that will be cost effective, that will mitigate some of those risks associated with that. So I think like anything, it'll be a long-term transition to move to cleaner sources. I know that there's a lot of hope around the issue of hydrogen, and there's a lot of work that's being done to substitute hydrogen and gas for natural gas in power plants, and that's another area where we can clean up the environment and clean up our energy sources. So I'll just throw those out for my first comments. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Arlen. Commissioner Pope Harden.
Yeah, thank you. Erica, I want to thank you for your presentation, and I think it's always good for us to hear perspectives, a variety of perspectives, and get that feedback when we make a decision. I think for me, I want to highlight kind of the point that Commissioner Littman made around, let's see, it's up to us to be creative. I think one of the things that COVID is uncovering is many people are going through the experience that many of our disadvantaged communities have already been going through. And for our disadvantaged communities, a lot of this struggle is exacerbated by COVID. And so I think instead of shying away from being big and bold, this is an opportunity while everybody is knocked back a little bit for us to build and rebuild smarter, better, more efficient, and just be mindful. I think you pointed out that, where was it? That minority-owned businesses are struggling getting capital. Well, that was the case before COVID. And so this is a great opportunity to help right some of those historic wrongs. And I think it blends really well with the equity conversation we just had, because equity is not just about the people living in those communities, but also the businesses in them as well. And so I just really hope that we're taking this opportunity to collectively think ambitiously and boldly about solutions. And let me see if I think that was the end of my comments. I may raise my hand again. Thank you for your presentation.
Thanks, Naila. Okay. I've got 4 more people wanting to speak. Commissioner Mohana, then Blackwood, Ayala, and Weiser.
I just want to thank the...
Great.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Now we can. Yeah.
Okay, I just want to thank the Metro Chamber for, the extensive amount of work that they put into these roundtables. I know that their reach has been very diverse, and really what has been said reflects the comments all the way from the small businesses, the mom and pops that are hurting today, all the way to the larger employers in our region that are so crucial to the economic recovery. But as Erica said, I think that the major theme that we're really hearing is that, we need to rely upon innovation and technological advancements in order to ensure that the ordinances that we place will be successful. And I think that any ordinance that we put out there needs to be coupled with the investment in the creativity and the technological advancements necessary to achieve what we want to hopefully accomplish by 2023, 2045. And, as Arlen was saying, SMUD has done some tremendous things in the past year, and really has showcased what a public-private partnership looks like. And we need to leverage upon those public-private partnerships in order to really not only, take steps to achieve the electrification that we're looking for, but, in the long run, saving utility costs for our residents, which really ties into the equity piece. But, just in the past year, the Solar Shares program that SMUD has rolled out has been tremendously helpful to, every sector of the community. But, we were very close to getting that shut down at the state level. And so I think anything that we're proposing today needs to be coupled with that co-investment, as Arlen discussed, to increase capacity, to ensure that we have creative programs that we can utilize. And, we really need to ensure that we are working as we, come up with these ideas, that we are creative, and it is possible. But I think more than ever before, we need to have those investments in the innovative, technologies that we're going to put forward, because without those technologies, we really can't achieve what we're looking to do. So I think, as we look at the year one projects, we need to couple some of these ordinances with those public-private partnerships that are going to be critical.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Blackwood.
Okay, got it. Thank you. And obviously, I am representing the Metro Chamber, and so Erica and I are very familiar with these issues. But there are just a couple of things that I just want to say so that it's being heard. COVID's impact on our business community is so deep and so great and so broad and so unknown that I don't want it to go underemphasized. It may feel a very logical leap to say, oh, of course, the business organization is going to want to not have mandate, right? It could be an easy mental leap to make. But I want you to know the Metro Chamber strongly supports the need to address these issues. We are a founding member of the Cleaner Air Partnership. Of our 4 key policy initiatives, one of them is all focused on Green Means Go and green technology. So please note that the place that we're coming from is not a traditional, business doesn't want this. We do want it, our businesses do want it, but the timing is so incredibly crucial. And I know we alluded to it a bit, but just to say it more discreetly, it may be easy to make an assumption on what business is. And it is easy to think, oh, it's well capitalized and it's for profits and you're trying to just increase margins. And, respectfully to Commissioner Littman's statement on the either or, right? That there's got to be a way to do it. And by all means, yes, creative. And by all means, yes, innovative. But very frankly, business in Sacramento is small for the most part. And the margins are so tight that a month and a half of being on a stay-at-home order has put them out of business. So it's just a mindfulness to know that the margin is very, very small. And at this point, as a Chamber of Commerce, to have to train our staff on crisis and suicide prevention is not a normal thing for us. So this is very abnormal times with huge mental health crisis, economic crisis for business. And while by all means we need to advance these principles and we support these principles, mandates with hard timelines when we are navigating an environment that we really don't know, 2023 will come really quickly. We may or may not have a vaccine by 2023. We frankly at this point don't even know when our stage 3 businesses can open. We don't know when kids can even go back to school. So I just want to stress that the climate change challenges are real. We acknowledge that they are real. We need to take proactive steps, but the shape of your business community right now is in dire straits. And we may frankly see 30 or 40% of our retail or hospitality businesses gone. And that's real. And it is a really abstract, hard thing to think about. So I just want to give that perspective. And then addition on the incentive-based side of the house, to just really point out that for our small business, a front-end incentive to encourage behavior is one thing that may be enticing. A rebate program still requires a significant amount of upfront capital, which they may or may not have. So I want to just give us that framing of, is it cash up front or is it a rebate situation? Similar, many of our nonprofits, you front operations, you turn it in for a grant, you get it 6 months later. So your cash flow may look okay, but you don't have that cash right now. And particularly with additional barriers to access to capital, it may be it's a small thing, but that front end cash being required versus a rebate that you have to wait on, they truly may not have it. And our businesses are in decision-making mode now that, do I close? Do I lay off 80% of my staff? Am I mortgaging every single thing that I have to just try to buy myself 2 more months? And it's very real and it's very serious. And we would not be having this conversation in this way pre-COVID. I mean, it is just a devastating game changer in every way. And I can't underscore how devastated. We've got to be in the position of creating incentive and removing just basic barriers, just to keep folks employed. And when this unemployment benefit starts to run out, businesses are scrambling just to be able to afford a portion of their previous staff. So, not to belabor it, but I can't overemphasize how devastated they are. And while these initiatives are important, we must be hyper mindful of the timing.
Thank you. Okay, this is a really important conversation. Unfortunately, we are running late. I have 3 more speakers in the queue, and I think we'll wrap it up. After that, I have commissioners. Sorry, my screen just changed and it confused me. I thought I had Ayala, Weiser, and Ledesma.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I wanted to follow up and make a couple observations, and I'll try to be quick to Erica's presentation.
Okay.
First of all,
I'm gonna
yes. First of all, I also wanted to thank you for what I thought was a really good and fair presentation. I don't disagree in principle with some of the observations that you made, and obviously understand the very drastic impact that the business community is having. But your first bullet talks about data. And I think one of the benefits that I appreciate from a body like the commission is that you've got different perspectives. And I know that many of us are looking at different data. So I wanted to make a couple of observations and then react to a couple of the specific recommendations that you commented on. One is, yes, the crisis is going to be deep, and it's going to take us a while for all of us to understand just how we come out. But to Lori Littman's point about the fact that we can't forget that climate change is still out there, there is already some data, some information that is suggesting that air pollution would make not only the human body more susceptible to something like COVID, but also what is scary is that apparently something like this virus in a polluted environment can impact and affect people much more efficiently than in a clean environment. So there's going to be all kinds. I'm just using this as an example in terms of some of the data, the information that many of us are tracking. And I know that I'm just using a couple of examples. There's a ton of additional information that we're all going to have to get our hands around and understand. But I think this does support the point that Lori made as far as we're in the long game for this, and coming out of this, we're still going to be facing the climate crisis. The last 2 observations I want to make are specific to your points on electrification and no longer using natural gas. Two points. One is there's already evidence, and it was a paper recently published in the journal Nature. The building sector, the emissions from the building sector are already the largest source of emissions and premature death in California. So we cannot forget that there is that impact as well. And specifically on the use of natural gas in the homes, there's already been some really nice work out of the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, which show that almost a third of all homes that are using natural gas have indoor air pollution levels that outside would be illegal. And that is really profound, right? Because what this tells us is that as the sources of traditional air pollution get cleaned up, what is happening indoor is going to be relatively more important. So, and guess what? It is hitting the people that apparently are most impacted, because you're talking about homes that are not as well equipped as a new house, for example, or a new building to deal with these issues. So I'm making these observations simply to make the point that we have a really difficult balancing act in front of us. And we need to be mindful of all these different perspectives so that hopefully we can walk that fine line. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Just very quickly, Commissioner Ayala, I want to make sure just the interpretation here. We aren't saying we should have the use of more gas. I think if anything, we don't want to limit SMUD's ability to where they source energy from. Going back to Arlen's comments, You know, this is about flexibility and innovation and technology. And there may be other sources of energy that we just don't know about now that we are using 20 years from now, knowing that, again, the goals of this commission is going into, I believe, 2025. So it is more a matter of, let's not restrict ourselves to just this one source we are looking at now in our world and our built environment. But again, what can we do in being innovative and creative and using technology so we have the flexibility and the capabilities in the future to really embrace something that could even be better than what we have now at our capabilities.
Thanks. Okay, Mackenzie, Commissioner Weiser next, then Commissioner Ledesma, and then we're going to have to move on.
Okay, I would like to piggyback off of what Commissioner Littman and Ayala just stated. I guess at this point, the conversation's sliding off of a cliff, and I feel like 18 months worth of work is kind of slipping away from us based upon something that is a tragic pandemic. I get it. We're all in this. We're all facing serious tragedy, but I would like us to keep in mind that we're all at home, safe in our homes right now, and the war may not be at our doorstep, but it's knocking. We already know the clock is ticking and that we are going to run out of time, and the climate is not waiting. And in fact, thank God it's slowing down the impacts because we're all at home and off the grid right now. But the reality of the situation is we need to step up and come and address this with the gusto that we sat down and signed up for 18 months ago when we took this initiative. And yes, I think we would be remiss if we think that climate change and COVID-19 don't have some level of connection with one another. And so I think we need to really utilize this rebuilding time to come back stronger, more resilient, and confident in the fact that we put our money where our mouth is upon rebuilding. So I understand we are all facing very unprecedented times, but there's no right time for a crisis, and climate change is a crisis as well.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Ledesma.
Thank you. And Erica, just want to say thank you for the presentation and reminding us sort of the principles and the feedback from the roundtable. It was helpful. And representing the city of West Sacramento, these are realities that are staring us right in the face, right? I got to leave here shortly within the hour to have a council meeting and get in our first real deep dive into the budget impacts we're facing. We have no choice to understand the realities of what you're talking about, and I understand your sentiment of the members and the business roundtable, and I hear from them, and we're working to help them in the ways we can through policy or just through promoting our local businesses, which we're doing through our chamber. So I clearly get it. I think part of the framing of this that I'll take from it is that we I think part of the struggle for me, at least me, and I've been pretty open about how are we going to achieve all this, right? And as a city, and I think part of what will become part of the plan is how we're going to finance all this. That's where I start in governing and being a part of the policymaking body. And so I understand the choices that are being made at the business level. That's what I do on my day job, working on access to capital issues across the country. But and those are very real. And but it down to where it impacts us locally. We have to make choices down to a multitude of priorities. This is among them. Ensuring our business climate, our business community has the resources we need. It's always been a public-private partnership for us. We've invested heavily in infrastructure in our community to ensure we get the outcomes we want. As our friends at Rayleigh's know, we've done a lot of work to ensure West Sacramento is a business-friendly climate. We invest in infrastructure and we invest in things that make our community go. But this is bringing a brand new element and prism we have to look through and get through. And I certainly understand the sentiment. And we are also faced with mandates, and we will be facing mandates that are not our choice. Because while we're looking at sales tax revenue, possible property tax revenue impacts downstream, we're also very cognizant of the fact of the state faces a $54 billion hole that they've got to fix, and all the surrounding agencies and everybody else that are going to be struggling downstream. So there's a lot that remains. My comment is we're all going through this together, and we understand the business climate is key to that, and our priorities to providing a community that's resilient to climate change is also a priority, and we'll work together to make it work. And I think having an understanding of all our challenges, and I'm certainly listening to yours as I'm asking you to listen to ours, because we'll have to implement this as we go forward. So thank you.
Thanks. Okay, thank you all of you. Erica, thanks for putting this together during these times in particular, and for making the presentation. And I think everyone hears your concerns. There's a lot to deal with right now, and we do need to hear all sides and concerns. Just to clarify, we'll be presenting our report or submitting our report to the cities. I am sure there will be lots of time at the cities, as well, for them to listen to concerns and balance. It hasn't been my impression that they will immediately implement everything we suggest. So
Again, thank you.
I'm sure you'll have a voice.
Yeah, you do have a partner in us in trying to find, again, innovative solutions towards this bigger goal. We do have a shared value and a shared interest in this. And if at any time you have questions, you want input from, again, the business community on ways we might be able to do that, please let us know. We had some great ideas, again, that we might be able to work towards that goal together. And we do agree this is going to be public and a private partnership. This is not one-sided on either way. And we have a responsibility both in the business community to do this as much as on the public side. So thank you again.
Yeah, we're all in it together. Thank you. Okay, one comment I guess I had for the commissioners is that the business concerns the report is contained in the supplemental report. And I do think we could probably strengthen the portion of our main report that talks about business, because I believe that was really written before COVID, and we could probably just reinforce the concerns and the necessity of business being a partner. So thanks for being here. And with that, I'm going to move us on to the next agenda item, which is the year one projects, or the near-term projects. Oh, and welcome, Commissioner Nelson. It's good to see you. Kate Meese worked really hard on this next section that we're going to talk about. There have been consultations with a lot of individuals and organizations around what is feasible as one-year projects, what projects can align with the economic recovery and stimulus efforts. So we will hear from her. I'm looking forward to the discussion. This is a really important part of our report. Kate.
Thanks, Anne. So for context on the year one project, this is something that we have been thinking about from the beginning, just knowing, again, that how we kick this off and the momentum we build in the first year is going to be critical for getting people excited about the effort overall and ensuring that we don't have a report that just sits on the shelf, since we've all worked so hard on it. Obviously, the context has changed in that time, and so we revisited the first year project with the idea that we do need to phase, and we do need to be very cognizant of the economic climate we're in, and of our businesses, particularly our small and medium-sized businesses, which we all want to come back and to be stronger when they come back. So we're all definitely sensitive to that, and that's very much at the forefront in our minds. So you will see that the overarching principles of the year one is very focused on the environmental justice piece, so looking at the committee and the definition of marginalized communities, and ensuring that there is staffing within the cities to move this stuff forward. This is a big effort. to get to carbon neutral by 2045, and that is going to take some shepherding in both of the cities. And then the next big piece is the COVID recovery climate connection. We are very mindful that in this first phase, while we are in a recession, we do need to be very focused on the measures that support economic development as well. So that was the goal there. I'm not going to read through these since we are running behind and you all have them with you. But I will highlight a few of the comments that came in, and again, encourage you to look at the raw comments in the Google Doc that you all have. So a few of the comments that came in, we've already heard the theme of we need incentives to support some of these projects, interest in maintaining telecommuting. That was one of our recommendation areas, recognition that there's going to be budget constraints, or are there other elimination of parking minimums or other measures that could be taken in that vein. Some conversation about the electrification and moving either faster on that and or prohibiting gas line expansion beginning in 2021, not just for the new construction piece, but just looking at gas line expansion overall. Again, a focus on preserving existing transportation corridors and mention of Walnut Grove branch line again. A lot of focus throughout the comments on education, so on the greening, landlord outreach, identifying areas that are under canopied neighborhoods. There were a few around establishing a interagency regional task force to continue to build on the breadth of expertise that you all have brought as commissioners. Looking at speeding up the date for the electrification ordinance from 2023 to 2021. A lot of interest in the food recovery and food security network as it fits with the crisis we're in now, both for the suffering of our restaurants, but also our community members. And that was something we prioritized in this list. Making bulk buys of solar energy and battery storage, focusing on what we can do with our cities, especially being mindful of the budget shortfalls that they're in on solar and energy efficiency, where there might be some cost savings there. Interest in prioritizing the neighborhood resilience hubs, again, with the mindfulness of our current situation, and then having the cities adopt an environmentally preferable purchasing program. So those are some of the big ones. There may be more comments that have come in since we started this meeting, and those are all on that spreadsheet that you can see in real time. So with that, I think we'll open it up to discussion about the year one project.
Yep, we'll have a discussion, and then our goal is to take action on this today. Commissioner Littman.
I really like the year one plans, and I think we can use that first year to build that foundation that we need. There were a few things that I know you're not looking for new ones for year one, but there are some things that are actually still that are happening. One is the Slow Streets campaign to close off some streets. Portland just closed off 100 miles of streets. And that's something that would be very simple to do in the year one. And speeding up electrification, definitely getting those ordinances in place before the climate action plan is in place, and also biodiversity plan. So there were a lot of things that come up within the draft plan that I think I don't think we have to limit ourselves, that all of those things that are farther reaching, that don't cost as much money, can be put in place that first year. And I'm really excited about that first year.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Commissioner Ayala.
Thank you. I'll make it quick. Just wanted to do two things. One, acknowledge Kate and the group. I know that we had a conversation about these projects, year one projects. So I think it was a commendable effort to try to identify these near-term strategies. But my question is more just, I'm curious logistically, was there, and I don't know if you can bend the projects or the ideas quite this way, but I wonder, was there anything that, since you had such extensive outreach with folks about these projects, were there things that didn't quite make it into year one projects, but thinking of the previous discussion we'd had with the city of Sacramento and their CAP, projects that perhaps could fall into a bin, say of, 2 to 5 years kind of thing? Did the ideas work out in such a way that you could kind of put them in these different buckets?
There were certainly great ideas that, we've got a whole report full of great strategies and tactics that were recommended. So there's certainly a lot to pull from, and you all had really good ideas that didn't quite fit within that first year filter of trying to align with, cost saving type measures. But that could be something that we think about, probably not as a voting item, but just additional recommendation to the cities. I think it'll be interesting when you see the presentation from the city of Sacramento to see how it aligns, and that may surface just some maybe more informal recommendations we want to make for a year 2 to year 5 list.
This is where I thought we would have the most conversation. You're all tired. Kate, I've got a question, which I should have asked you before. When we're talking about year one, are we talking about year one, like this coming fiscal year, as opposed to year one of CAP implementation?
So that's a good question. I guess I wasn't thinking about differentiating with the CAP implementation. I was thinking as the time that we make the recommendations to the cities, that basically starts the clock. So, we didn't want to tie it to a particular time because we didn't exactly know when the process would be done. So, there may be things that are implemented in advance of the city, certainly West Sacramento, adopting their CAP, since they're on a different time horizon than the city of Sacramento, and we want to encourage them to do that.
Yeah, that's how I thought of it also, but I realize we've never really clarified, given that specificity. So we should probably be clear. We're not talking about waiting till the CAPs are in place to take these measures. Okay, I see that we have Commissioner Mohana, Ledesma, and Blackwood have their hands up. So we'll start with you, Nikki.
Yeah, I just want to thank Kate for all the work and to put together what I think is, appropriately ambitious goals for year one. I know we've been spending several months on this, and of course the recent circumstances haven't helped us much, but considering what we just heard from, the business roundtables, I think it seems like the greatest concern out of those year one projects seems to be on the 100% electrification under energy efficiency. And, it seems like we have two different prongs to that. One is that, we're looking at 100% electrification in new construction by 2023. And then additionally, promoting utility energy efficient programs in marginalized communities as the second prong. But, I don't know if we need clarification on that as to whether that just solely is related to marginalized communities that we're looking at in terms of incentive programs, or whether, I think considering today's time, we're seeing impacts across the board in every community. And, affordability is a really big factor. We want to make sure that we don't impact production in order to achieve that affordability that we really need desperately in these times. So, you know, I would suggest that we increase that the programming to include all communities. And also, as we look at the 100% electrification by 2023, that we're coupling that with these incentive programs so that we can, you know, cover these upfront costs that are going to lead to a long-term vision that we're looking for.
And can I make a couple comments on that?
Yeah, please.
So absolutely, and on the energy efficiency piece, I think that we certainly can be more expansive on that, but we wanted to be mindful of the need to reduce costs for our marginalized communities first and foremost, and that the programs mentioned there are, you know, completely incentive based, so there would be no cost. Grid Alternatives, it's, you know, they get state rebates to put free solar on low income households. So, you know, those types of programs can have a direct cost savings for our low income residents without, you know, having them need to put anything up front. On the electrification for new buildings, we're going to see from the city of Sacramento at our next meeting that for new buildings, at least, there's cost savings for doing that. And so that's why for phase one, we're focused on the new building piece, because we are very mindful of not putting new costs on that development.
Thanks, Kate. I just want to, if you don't mind, I just want to check in with Commissioner Nelson. Are you needing to leave, and did you want to say something before you left?
To leave, I just wanted to say that I think that it's important to remember that these elements are really a set of priorities, and we're giving a guidance as far as priorities are. And so I support the year one projects, and I think that we have narrowed it down to things that can be done and that will help it guide in the future. So I hope we look at it as a priority setting operation.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Commissioner Ledesma and then Blackwood.
Thank you. And I think I'll just keep this brief because I do support the work Kate and team have done to kind of pull together the CS one-year projects. But a lot of questions came up earlier with Sacramento and around implementation. And our council has talked about, I just want for the public and for commission, my colleagues on the commission to understand, we're taking a stance that if there's an opportunity to implement a project that puts us further with that fits in line with or aligns with some other goal or project we're already seeking, you know, we want to get there too. We're pretty good at that, whether it's been in the transportation initiatives we've taken on. And so we're going to be looking for opportunities. I know that's been kind of a concern when we can start these. That's our intent. Now, COVID certainly puts a different pall over all that and our ability to do that from a funding perspective. But I just wanted to clear for the commission and for the public that that's as much as we can. We want to be proactive and innovative, and I think that's kind of what we do best. We're small enough we can do that. Which brings us to the electrification one, because I'm going to support that, but I just want to, again, and I know I've been a broken record on this issue, and my friend Arlen can turn me off at this point, but we are going to have a hard time. I'm just being blunt. Reading these kind of electrification lowering bills is going to be a hard issue for us on the yellow side of the river. PG&E is just not the partner that Sacramento has in SMUD. And that affects business, that affects residents of all neighborhoods who pay higher electricity rates than they do just because they live on one side of the river versus another. And that is impactful, and it will inhibit our ability to see through providing some incentive programs, providing expanding those programs. We just don't have that type of relationship and partner. They're nice people, and they're just in a different place than our friends at SMUD. And this will be something that the council, our council, has said is a priority to address. We have ways that or paths we'd like to take. But I will look to this commission to help guide that as well and support those efforts, because we can't get there from here. And I think I just want that recognized and understood by our partners on the commission. So those are my two comments. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner Ledesma. And I don't recall whether we acknowledged that point in the report about the challenge WESAC has with the provider, but I think we should if we haven't. Commissioner Blackwood and then Commissioner Corliss.
Thank you. So I will be really brief and echo everything that Commissioner Ledesma just said, to point out, there are different providers. And so WESAC has a completely different dynamic to navigate. Obviously the businesses have a different dynamic to navigate on that side of the river. And in addition, the hard date, the 2023, I just want to bring awareness again, by all means, sense of urgency, yes, yes, yes. But 2023 is going to come quick. And, you know, we may or may not have a vaccine by 2023. So it's just a completely different world. I don't know if there's the opportunity to modify that at this time, or if we are just voting on this as written and it's a hard yes or no. That's just a question.
Yeah, well, to that, I would say at some point someone will make a motion, and that we will deal with the language then. And of course, you could weigh in and amend or make your own motion. Okay, Commissioner Corliss.
Thanks. I just want to say again, great work to Kate and everybody on the year one. I'm really happy to see the translation of where we want to be in 2030 and 2045 right down to the next 12 months. So I think that's excellent. I would also say, just on the transportation side, I think there is an opportunity. We say in the recommendations right now, which I think are the pre-COVID car-free districts on weekends, I would love to see the cities really experiment while traffic is lower with streets, with car-free streets, following the lead of Oakland and Portland and other cities across the country, West Sacramento and Sacramento, number one. So I think that's an opportunity. I hope we don't wait for even this report to be adopted. I hope the cities are working on that. And second, just we talk telework, and we've also got an opportunity. I've been talking to Amanda and GSEC and some of the business, but we have an opportunity to try to figure out how we can actually incentivize more employees to telework as we come out of the crisis. So we're working on that with a couple other folks, but I think there's some opportunities that we should be jumping on fast.
Okay, thanks. I don't see any other hands up. So I just want to echo the thanks to Kate. She has spent a ton of time on this. And I think it's a very strong product. So with that, it would be time for someone to make a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Commissioner Ayala?
I second the motion.
I'm sorry, no, I don't know who made the motion.
Commissioner Corliss.
James made it.
Okay, great. Motion to include these one-year recommendations in our final report. Okay, any discussion on the motion before we vote? All right, let's do a roll call vote again. Julia Kim, are you there?
I am right here. I do apologize. I caught that the motion came from Commissioner Corliss. I did not catch who seconded.
Second by Ayala.
Thank you for that. Okay, Chair Stossel?
Aye.
Amanda Blackwood? Commissioner Blackwood?
No.
Commissioner Wick?
Aye.
Commissioner Orchard,
Oops, aye.
thank you. Commissioner Ledesma,
Aye.
Commissioner Tanner,
Aye.
Commissioner Lee,
Aye.
Commissioner Corliss,
Aye.
Commissioner Littman,
Aye.
sorry, Commissioner Weaver.
Did you say Weezer?
Yes, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Arnold,
Aye.
Commissioner Teal,
Nay.
Commissioner Pope Hardin,
Aye.
Commissioner Mohana,
Aye.
Commissioner Nelson,
Aye.
Commissioner Bray,
Aye.
Commissioner Hanson,
He had to jump off.
Commissioner Rodriguez,
Aye.
and back to you, Chair Sosman.
Okay, thank you. The motion passes. Our next item then is the final report. Our goal today is not to vote on the report, but rather to get any input commissioners have on the draft report so that LGC can take it back, finalize the draft to bring it back to us in June for final adoption and release. So I turn it over to you, Kate, to make any comments on the report that I think everyone has read and to summarize the public comment.
Thank you. So the report highlights the strategies that that have already been voted on by all of you over numerous meetings. So that is the bulk of the report. What's new about the report is the acknowledgement of the context we're in. So tying it to the new era of COVID and the alignment with recovery efforts. And then we also have the overview of the process and the equity recommendations, in addition to the year one projects, which were just voted on. So a lot of this has already been voted on, but what we're looking to hear from all of you in our discussion is, as Ann said, does this fit the right tone? Are we properly framing our goals both on equity and some of the other overarching principles, and on how critical it is to align with our COVID recovery? So we want to make sure that we're capturing that right tone. I will give some overview of the public comments. There were 36 comments received. Again, encourage you to look at the live tracking document to read them yourselves. But a few of the things that came up, really making sure that we are weighing efficacy with cost and difficulty, which is something we talked a lot about throughout the process. Mindful of the transportation equity piece again, and how it's divided and cut off. The city of Sacramento in particular, making sure that there's financial incentives, a comment around adding more bridges across the rivers connecting the cities, particularly for bicycle trips, a focus on land use, so a specific comment around destinations being close by and getting away from sprawl in the big box stores, need for massive public engagement. So we talked a lot about that in terms of our foundational principles, because a lot of this will need to be behavioral changes and come with the proper education and incentives to do that. Another reference to the transportation project in the Walnut Grove branch line. A number of comments about 2045 being too far and the need to ramp that up and focus on a 2030 target. There's a number of comments from the Tree Foundation about the urban greening pieces. So looking at the canopy coverage and potentially increasing those targets, climate appropriate tree species, prioritizing tree deficient communities, which is something we talked a lot about, looking at the water supply for our urban greening efforts. So installing gray water systems and other approaches to ensure that that piece of the urban greening is also climate friendly. Recognition of the extreme heat that we're going to be facing and the need to think about where we do the urban greening to make it, cooler and more attractive to do active transportation and some of the other measures around cooling. Looking at policy around replacement of public trees that have to be removed. Focus on permeable paving where possible for the trees and to capture as much water as possible. Encouragement of the transition to zero emission landscaping equipment and hand tools. That's been a big theme we've heard about throughout the process. And a transition to zero emission technology for heavy duty vehicles. This issue around restaurant use for gas, that we heard that from the restaurant roundtable, that would be a big shift, and there are many concerns about electrification for that industry in particular. Again, more on the speeding up the timeline, some concern about where propane fits within the electrification ordinance. I don't think that's as big of an issue for the city of Sacramento and West Sacramento as it might be for some of the incorporated areas, but that was one of the comments. Across all these, a big need to focus on equity, incentives. Let's see. Fees associated with natural gas should be considered. So a lot of activity around the electrification, most of it needing to ramp up, but some saying, be cognizant of particular industries. Setting a date to mandate the all electric appliance replacement. And they suggested 2025. We did get some comments around a desire to have more time for the public comment process. So I'd remind folks that while we asked for people to submit comments so that we could have this conversation today, we are taking public comments until our last meeting where we will adopt the final report. And then finally, some concerns from the Regional Builders Exchange around any EV infrastructure readiness criteria and how that might impact their business as well. So those are the bulk of the comments we received, and again, you can see all the raw comments on the matrix. So I'll hand it over to you, Anne.
Thanks, Kate. Okay, input on the report. Well, while you think about that, a question I have, and I don't know that we can resolve it on this call, but something for us to think about is, I think many of us will be disappointed if we can't have, a unanimous vote around our final report. So for those who've had to vote no today on some portions, I guess the question is there, what would it take in order to get a final vote yes on the report? Is there language that could be included? And is there a way to get there without compromising the will of the majority? So you don't have to answer now, but I'll be reaching out to you about that. Okay, so in June, we will be bringing the report back for a vote, and that's our last meeting. So we won't have another chance after that to review it. So any comments? Otherwise, we'll move on. All right. Okay, thank you, Kate. And
Looks like Alberto has a comment.
Oh, okay, great, thank you.
Actually, just a quick question, clarification on the public comment, Kate,
Yes.
that was described for us. I am very happy with the report. I think Kate and the group did a phenomenal job, sort of capturing the multiple months of deliberations and proceedings, the tax and all that. But given the public comment, I was following your document online, and by the way, it's pretty cool that you can actually put that real time. But is the expectation that we will respond to each of the comments, and are those going to be included as part of the final report, or how do we?
No, so like the same, we'll follow the same process we have for all the other meetings. So the idea is that the comments are for all of you, and then you determine, and it's the same for, the TAC recommendations. You took the recommendations, and some of it you said, yes, you want to move on. You gave direction on others. So the idea is you are reading that and reviewing that, and you are giving direction to, me and Julia and the folks staffing the commission to make any changes you want to see to then adopt the final report.
Yeah, I would just add to that that part of the report, well, I guess it's in the supplemental report, there's a summary of public input that we've received. So to the extent there are new ideas or comments, I would assume that would be updated so that the cities get the benefit, and the readers of the report get the benefit of that information.
That's great.
Thanks, Kate. Okay, Commissioner Orchard.
Thanks, and my compliments to Kate and staff on this. I think it's a really great report. As far as, I guess one of the things I was going to ask is, if we give this some more thought in the next few days, should we just provide those to you? Because what I want to do is read it again based with the eye of, the conversation today, both the conversation around equity, but again, the conversation about that we heard from the business roundtable, to make sure that, it's very thought-provoking, both of those conversations for me. So I want to read it. I want to read it again through those lenses and have the opportunity to provide any thoughts. But I understand you also have a deadline that we would have to meet to do that. So I just wanted to check in about what folks thought about that.
I think that's good. And I think that goes to what I was saying before about really wanting, hoping to be able to have unanimity around the final report, and if there's ways to incorporate some of the sentiments that we heard today. It is tricky because we just have one more meeting, and we always want to be transparent about it. So I think we need to think about our process for that. Kate, do you have thoughts on that?
I do, yeah, I agree. I'm very open and interested in hearing your thoughts. We have started setting up calls with all of you to prepare for that last meeting. So, clearly the earlier we can get that, the better. I do think it's important when you look back through the report to think about sort of two buckets. There are the pieces that we've already voted on, and then there are the pieces that we haven't. So really what we're talking about changing between now and the next meeting would be the pieces that we have not voted on. So just, I want to be careful to frame it in that way when you're going back to think through where to spend the most time.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, the commission has voted on the actual strategies, and the strategies, the foundational principles, the equity recommendations. We haven't voted on the narrative language that goes around all of that. And I think that's what could possibly be worked on to reflect more the tone of where we are today. I think that's what I'm hearing. We'd need to do it quickly because I do feel like we'd need to get the report online so that the public has a time to comment before the last meeting.
And I can follow up with a timeline for when we would need that, just to ensure that we give everyone sufficient time to see any changes that we make.
Okay, Commissioners Mohana, Wick, and Poparden. So Nikki, you're up.
Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify, Anne, as you said, and as we've discussed before, I think the ability for us to get a unanimous vote is very critical because we really are voting on the vision. And I think it's the ways in which we accomplish that vision that may be contested. And so, you know, as we've discussed, and you know, I do have concerns with some of these, the way that these things are going to be implemented in the future. However, you know, I voted for the year one project because I believe in the overall vision. I believe that that is where we need to get to. However, the ways that we get to that, I think each city is going to be tackling that with the resources that they have. And, you know, I can say, on behalf of myself and the developer community, I know we're going to be very involved in those conversations as they move forward. But, you know, the overarching vision is something that I think we all want to see. Of course, we're dealing with, you know, a tremendous crisis right now. And we know that ultimately people are going to be struggling with the loss of employment. People may end up moving further away from the centers of employment as a result of the, you know, loss of income, the lack of affordability. And I think the ways in which we accomplish that sustainability that we're looking for is so critical. That we know that over 50% of our GHG emissions come from transportation. The last thing we want to do is, by, you know, putting these implementation measures forward, really create the need for people to move outwards, further outwards, and kind of retract everything that we've tried to accomplish. We want to make sure that we are incentivizing urban infill, that we're incentivizing affordability in these centers of employment. And so, you know, the ways that we achieve some of the visions that have been set forth are going to be the most critical pieces of how we accomplish that. And so I know on behalf of myself as a commissioner, as a vested person in this community, I want to be a part of those implementation measures. And I can say that I really appreciate the vision and the way that we are going to implement this is going to be the most critical aspect as we move forward.
Thank you. Commissioner Wick?
Hi, sorry, I realized I forgot to unmute my video the last time I spoke, so I broke the rules, so I apologize about that. Well, I have three points. The first is that, you know, I think that these robust conversations are healthy because what I've gathered from this whole experience is, you know, we've put so much emphasis on the overall vision. And I think we all are bought into the overall vision. At least I'll use an I statement. I'm bought into the overall vision, and I get the sense that my colleagues are as well. And it doesn't surprise me that now that we're at that critical implementation phase and we're getting some more perspectives that maybe hadn't been brought as strongly in the past, that we have different ways of how to get to the place that we want to get to. But we all know that we are at the table because we want to get to, you know, carbon zero by 2045, and that's why we're invested in this effort. So I think it's healthy to have these robust discussions about implementation. And I just want to say that for myself, and I know that others will agree, that I will support any effort. I'll have coffee with anyone in a socially distant manner. I will have Zoom coffees, lunches, dinners. We can introduce ourselves to our pets. That seems to be a team favorite at RIL. So I just want to say that I want to be a part of, you know, that work that it's going to take to get to that unanimous place with the report, and also the hard work that it's going to take as community members in the years ahead, because this is just the very beginning. Even though it feels like, oh, we're almost at the finish line, it's really the beginning of the start. I also have a request for data, and this could be as simple as somebody sending me things to look up myself. You don't have to prep it for me, but I would like to see a sense of what the policy platforms are for some of the business community representatives. I'd like to know, because I'm actually a Metro Chamber member ourselves, RIL is, and I haven't seen the Chamber's policy platform on climate change, and I don't know if they have one, but I would like to see some of that, so I could do some research on some of the perspectives. I'd also like to see the policy platforms of some of the other chambers of commerce in the region, and also some of the business community groups that I may not even know exist, kind of what is their lens, because I'd really like to do a really deep dive in the next couple weeks on the business lens. And so if anyone wants to email me or suggest what I can Google, I'd really appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, next we have Commissioners Pope Harden, Teal, and Ayala.
Yeah, so I want to say I am just really proud of what this commission has been able to do, and Kate, your team has been able to do in the 18 months that it's been going on. I came late to the party, and I'm just really proud of the work. I want to echo what Commissioner Wick just said in terms of I'm willing to meet and extend myself to have these conversations to make sure that we get over the finish line. And I also have questions about public comment from here on out, because I also are we going to be facilitating any type of public forums, webinars, question sessions? Are we just receiving comment online? How are we doing public comment moving forward?
Okay.
I guess I'm not totally, so it's going to be the same way that we've done it in the past. So the public comments portal through the website has been open from the beginning of the process. So that will continue to be open in the same way that people provided comments for this meeting. That same portal will be open through the next meeting.
Gotcha. So when does the outreach portion happen, where we're really showing the community the recommendations? When is that happening?
Yeah, so after you guys all vote on it, we've started initial conversations with the cities around how we'll promote that. So we will have, press events, and we will be reaching out to all of you to encourage you to do social media and to distribute it through your listservs. Unfortunately for LGC, we have been at the end of our contract for probably a couple months now, just because we added so many meetings and we added tax, and this has been a really important effort, and certainly a labor of love for me and Julia and the rest of the staff, and certainly for Anne, who's been volunteering her time. So we don't have within our scope, an outreach portion of this. So we are hoping that you guys will be willing to send it out to all of the folks that you connect with. But as I said, we will do what we can to do press events. And on behalf of the local government commission, we've got a statewide reach as well. So, through all the channels that we have, we will definitely be distributing information.
Okay.
Do you want to add anything to that, Anne?
Well, just that really when this work is over, it transitions to the cities to develop their implementation plans, hopefully in light of this commission's recommendations. And they will be doing a lot of outreach as well, hopefully taking into account the recommendations that the commission is making about how to do that outreach. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay, Commissioner Teal.
Thank you, Chairman. My question is to Kate, I think. Your comments about, or your reminder that there's a lot of things that we've already voted on, and we're voting on, sending this report up. And I guess my question is around how do I factor in, a lot has changed in my mind. Questions have been raised since I did vote for things that I'm not sure I should vote for again, or that I agree with currently, given the circumstances now. So how do I factor that into our discussion over the next month?
Yeah, as a procedural process, I think that's more for Anne than for me.
Okay.
Well,
For Anne.
no, okay, that's okay. When we voted originally, we said we would move these recommendations forward subject to finalization when we voted on the final report. So when we all vote on that final report, we are voting on it as a whole. I think I think we all need to remind ourselves what we did vote for, and if we have to change our mind, why. But I do think that's why we need to do some work between now and then around how to couch things. We voted on recommendations, like, several things at the same time. I don't know if it will, one idea would be for if certain people or communities wanted to say, well, there's this one part of the report, that we have concerns about, and include that. I don't really know the answer right now, but I guess I would willing to, and others have said this too, like just spend a lot of time to try to get that unanimity around the report. And if we can't, we can't. It'll be what it is.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the desire for unanimity. Whatever.
Yeah,
I get that. I like that too when I serve on a board or whatever. So I understand that. I'm just trying to factor in a lot of the changes that have occurred, and how they might impact or might have impacted my vote previously. So I'll look at the whole thing and try to work at giving input on, is there anything that we need to back away from? Do we need to change the timing? Whatever. I'll look at it through that lens as we move forward this next month.
Yeah, I mean, I think some questions are there things in the ideally, are there things in the narrative that could be changed so the recommendations can stand? Or do you need, do folks need to object to some of the recommendations, but not all? But I think if you look at the report, from that perspective, it's not all or nothing.
Okay, thank you for your help.
Yeah. Commissioner Ayala, and then Bray.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate. Arlen made a really good point, and it prompted another question from my side. I think I will do the same thing and take a look at the report again, but look at it through the lens of the very good discussion that we had today. And along those lines, coming back to the great presentation that Jackie made for us, capturing the equity tag. One of the points that she talked about was making our process and our commitments and recommendations accessible. I think she actually talked about de-wonking the language so that the communities that we're trying to reach primarily and the most can actually understand what we're getting into. So with that in mind, it would be nice if we could get a sense from someone like Jackie and the organizations that she's been working with to see if there's anything in the report that could be improved or changed to make sure that we get to those that we're trying to reach most critically. Or maybe you have had some input from Jackie and the equity tag on that. But if we haven't, I think that would be one area that would be useful for me as a commissioner to know if the communities are going to be perceiving the report as fairly accessible.
That's a good point. We certainly have for pieces of it, but I think now that it's a whole package, it would be a different ask to think through the accessibility of the language.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I don't think Jackie's still on, but we'll check back with her too. Commissioner Bray.
Thank you. So I want to add my thanks to everybody else's for Kate's good work, the tax, the commissioners. We've spent an extraordinary amount of time getting to this point. And I think I look at it a little bit differently. I mean, after listening to all of the dialogue and having an appreciation for all of the concerns that we have, and Mike, especially yours, where, now that we're in this place, are we thinking we might want to make a different decision? And so my response to that is, we need to double down and do what we propose that we should do. It's not a time to back away. It really isn't. And this pandemic is showing us things that were in plain sight, and we can either address them now and take the pain and just dog our way through it. And while I believe we're all committed to the vision that's been cast by this report, at some point, good enough is, perfect is the enemy of good enough. And if we are forthright, and this is where that framing is really going to be important, by saying, yes, we are in a unique time. We are dealing with something that we've never dealt with before, but the climate is going to continue to change. And so we have an opportunity to make this all different. And it's going to be hard and messy, and people are going to disagree. And, we are going to go through this extended period of scarcity. I mean, all of those things that we heard today. But I think that provides us with an opportunity to really double down and think differently, right? Because we've got the baseline, we've got, the bad case, we've got the worst case, but then we've got different. And we don't know a lot of stuff right now. And so what is it that we do know, and what is it that we can bring to bear, while also being clear-eyed and making sure that that narrative reflects the fact that we are in uncertain times and that we are in a less than perfect world. And so I would encourage all of us as commissioners. I mean, I'm wrestling with these same things, but I'm still committed to, what we said we believed was important for us to do to address this crisis. And so now I'm trying to figure out, how do we double down? And how do we bring the community, whether it's businesses, whether it's neighborhoods, I mean, how do we help bring all of those folks along, even in the midst of all of these challenges? So, I don't know, I feel even more passionate about the fact that we've got to figure out how we can move this forward, because the climate is going to continue to change, whether we're in a pandemic, post-pandemic, and I know there's going to be a lot of casualties as a result of that, both literally and figuratively. But that also provides us an opportunity to build something new, different, better, stronger, and more sustainable.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, any other comments?
And I just wanted to take a minute to really recognize Julia Kim, who is really the workhorse behind all this. I appreciate everybody complimenting the report and the other aspects, but Julia's behind the scenes for the most part and doesn't get to stand up here and get any of the credit. So I just wanted to throw in my kudos for her and all the hard work she's put into this.
Great, thank you. And the others on your team as well. Okay, I guess I'm not taking this from this that people want to back down on the vision or backpedal or backtrack, but there are, given the climate, that we do need to likely adjust some parts around the report to properly reflect, appropriately reflect this conversation and what we've been hearing. And we may get a unanimous vote, and we may not. But I do think it's important that the report reflects the voices of people on the commission, even if it's expressed as a minority view. And how we proceed over the next couple of weeks, I don't see it as huge changes. It may be some passionate sentences and paragraphs, but I don't see like a big overhauling of the report. So I feel like we can get that done. We will need to get it done quickly though, and we'll be needing time for many of you. Do people feel okay with that? Thumbs up. Okay, I think this is hard, but this is hard discussion, but this is where we are right now in our lives and the issues, and everything's hard right now. So it makes sense that this is too. All right, thank you, Kate, and for all of you for the frank input. We accomplished a lot tonight. We will get back to you shortly with whatever our process. Kate and I'll work something out for the very short term. So thank you all for your engagement, and thank you to the public for the comments and your ongoing engagement. Our last meeting is scheduled for June 29th, the same time, 4 to 7:30, which is designed to enable people who have different schedules in their lives to participate. The objectives for that meeting are to adopt and release the final report. We'll hear reports from the cities on their early implementation efforts and plans. And Kate and I have been having conversations with many of the commissioners and organizations about commitments that you all or your organizations are willing to make as we move forward. And we'd like to announce those at the final meeting as well, in connection with releasing the report. And I think that'll really strengthen the effort. Oh, and the other thing we'll hear at the last meeting is a report out of the funding and financing TAC on financing options, which are critical. So thank you, or I guess questions, otherwise we'll close out. Any questions or comments? All right, thank you, commissioners. And Alberto, yes.
I just want to real quickly, Anne, on your point, on your last point, I want to encourage my fellow commissioners to really think hard about the point you made about what commitments can we make, because I think the power of what we bring to this effort is not just what the cities can do, and I trust that they will do a lot, but I think the power we bring is what we individually, as representatives of the public and the private sector and multiple entities, what can we add to that so that we can amplify what the two cities are going to accomplish? Because it brings me back to the very beginning of what we're trying to do here, which is really to get to where we want to be is going to take more than just the two cities. And as great an effort as they're going to make, I think we do need to keep in mind that many of us operate at a regional level. So I want to invite others to take up the challenge and really put on our thinking hats in the scheme of the crisis that we're now living. You know, what can we commit to that really amplifies what this commission has been able to accomplish, which for sure is a lot.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, those commitments will they'll demonstrate the partnerships, and they'll demonstrate the feasibility of moving forward, which is really important. All right. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you, Kate and Julia and your team, all the presenters. And I don't know if they're still on, but Julia Burrows and David Tilley from the city's office who work with us all the time as well. So everybody stay home and healthy, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.